Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, following the 3H's of the channel. And in this video, it's a compilation of stories that I've done last year and some 2 years ago for those long drives at night. Or if you need something to fall asleep to, or if you just happen to enjoy it. So, as always, pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I've never talked about these, but last summer, I had a creepy thing happen, so I guess I'll tell. It's probably no big deal. So I was in the passenger seat of my friend's truck. His girlfriend was in the back with her friend. We're making this long drive from Denver to a lake in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska. The women are taking forever to be ready, so we leave around 5 to 6 p.m. The drive there was at least 5 hours, so it was dark for more than half the drive. The trip is very unremarkable until we get into Nebraska. Everything looks creepy. There's tons of deer that would jump out if you weren't paying attention. So we're all getting tired at this one point, and my friend's girlfriend's phone tells us to take a turn onto a dirt road. It's seriously the middle of nowhere. My buddy and me are kind of spooked about this, so we take out our pistols just in case something happens. We're driving down this straight dirt road for miles, seeing eyes as we go, the occasional deer. All of a sudden, on the right side of the road, what looks like a naked man is sprinting alongside the road away from the truck. He's outrunning us at 30 miles per hour. I can't describe it. And then, all of a sudden, it looks like he's flapping his wings. Suddenly, this man, this thing, literally turns into an owl and peels off. Seeing this left us all so puckered that we're ripping up the seats. The story goes on a little bit from there, but basically that's the spooky part. If it had been just me, I would have thought I was hallucinating, but we all saw the exact same thing. This happened when I was a junior in high school and had just gotten my own truck, which meant that I was essentially free. I was driving to a somewhat nearby town in Colorado to meet some friends to hang out. On the way home, I was driving by myself late at night. I wasn't super familiar with the roads, so a down sign made me miss my turnoff onto an old dirt road / shortcut. I ended up driving almost 10 miles in the wrong direction before I decided to turn around. Just as I was getting ready to do a U-turn, I saw something at the corner of my eye. It was big. Not super massive, but very large. It was just sitting on a large stone gatepost, and it turned its head and looked at me as I began to pass it. It was hunched over and looked like it was eating something or resting. But as it stretched out, it had to be over 6 feet tall. It had eyes, but they didn't glow like a bird's or non-human mammals do. It looked at me, and then it opened these 12 to 15 foot wings, and with 2 quick beats, it was so high that I could no longer see it. It didn't scare me at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I knew that my eyes didn't deceive me. This wasn't a bird. For the longest time, I didn't know what the hell this thing was. But then a few years later, I started hearing stories about the Mothman, but this was just slightly different. I saw it several other times as well, but only brief glances. It liked to follow my car at night, or fly fast and low across the road in front of me. 2 other people saw it with me over the 4 to 5 months it followed me. Almost 13 months to the day that I first saw it. I had a good friend die, and after that, I never saw it again. Locals in the area say they have seen these huge things, but I've only ever seen their shadows or their outlines in the dark. It scares the hell out of me, even to this day. So when I was a teenager, I was living in Oklahoma, and not the city part either. My closest neighbor was a mile or so away. My cousins and I decided to go camping like always during the summer. So we're gathering supplies, drinks, hot dogs, knives, and a shotgun in case of wolves or coyotes. We have about 9 or 10 acres to play around on. So we camp by a stream that's pretty far out from the house. The darkness hits and the campfire blazes. There's good times, good music, and good food. We're all really vibing. The fire dims down and we start telling stories. And then we hear this rustle just outside the line of sight in the stream. No footsteps, no anything else. And then the air feels denser, like it's hard to breathe, and tastes weird. We see the figure just out of sight. It's crouched down. It's crouched like how you'd expect to see a werewolf bent over. Cousin number 1 grabs the shotgun. Cousin number 2 and myself pull out knives. There's this weird howling moan, gurgle sound behind us. We think it's a pack of coyotes. The fire goes out. We are all huddled together, and then something tears into my leg. Cousin number 2 kicks the embers into the direction of the beast. I pass out from the immense pain. It's like nothing I've ever felt before or after this. Cousin number 1 is dragging me to the house. Number 2 fires his shotgun twice into the darkness. They finally regain their composure, and I come too. My cousins are freaking out. We're running through at least 7 acres of forest, or I'm hobbling as fast as I can. We see the light of our house, but then the light goes out through this thicket. We can't see anything. The smell returns, but we fortunately make it to the house. We get in, we lock the door and close all the windows. We go into the bathroom and barricade ourselves in. I tend to my wounds. At some point in the night, we hear rustling around outside, and there's this sort of sniffing sound. We wait it out till morning. We go back to the area, and our campsite is wrecked, but we agree not to pursue this farther and just don't go out to that area again. So I think it's high time that I share my own story. I don't really give a rat's ass whether you believe me or not. I'm just recounting to you a nightmarish experience that me and my friends had. So, here we go. So all of us, me and my friends, are all American. We were all in our early 20s, and this was in 2003. I had just finished getting an engineering degree at college, and I was relaxing this one day in a cafe with the boys. We were all roommates, so we know each other very well. Me and my 3 other friends, Greg, Maximilian, yes, that's his name, and I'm pretty jealous of it too because it sounds really cool and badass, but I'll be referring to him as Max. And there's also Franklin, or Frank for short, and these are their real names. I'm not giving their last names for obvious reasons, but while at the cafe, we all decide that we should go on a bro trip. We decide on camping. Now, none of us are particularly experienced at camping deep in the woods or just camping in general, but we all have gone regular camping before and we quite enjoyed it. We decide that Because we're not experienced, we need a place that's not way out there in the event that we manage to screw up something and we need to leave or somebody gets hurt. So Franklin lived in New Jersey at the time, and he suggested camping in the Pine Barrens. He said, "It covers a surprisingly large area and is as remote as we are going to get considering our budget and where we live," Frank explains. The rest of us agree that the place sounds pretty good, so we start to plan out the trip. We decide that we need to go during the summer or the fall, as a cold camping trip would just suck ass. Maximilian proposes that instead of camping at some basic bitch campsite with like 200 other people, why not just go hiking, find a suitable clearing just off the trail, and camp there for 3 or 4 days. We all like this idea. Greg says that his cousin could drop us off and pick us up, as he would not really have a place to park a car for several days while we decide to romp around in the woods. So after this meetup, we can fast forward a few days. We have the trip all planned out for the most part. We're going to be out there for 4 days and 3 nights, leaving on Friday and returning on Monday. Greg's cousin will drop us off at the edge of the woods. We will rendezvous with his cousin at the intersection of Long Island Expressway and Wading River Road on the 4th day. We have the following: a one-shot 22 LR rifle for each of us. Additionally, Max has a .45 ACP 1911, and Frank has a revolver, a .38 or a .22, I don't remember which. We have our camping essentials. I'd rather not waste time describing those though. I think Greg brought a fishing rod though, and we all brought a few changes of clothes. We decided against bringing our girlfriends, as Greg had just broken up with his, and we didn't want him to feel left out and feel alone. And all the other ones were not too crazy about spending several nights in the woods. So once again, we can fast forward a few days to the Friday. I have all my stuff packed and ready to go. At like 10 or 11 a.m., Greg's cousin pulls up to our house in a dark green Plymouth minivan. We toss our stuff in the back and we head off. I think it was like an hour-and-a-half drive from the house to where we would get dropped off at. For the sake of brevity, I will refer to Greg's cousin as Carl. Carl seems like a pretty cool guy. He graduated university a few years before we did, so the drive there is pretty fun, and we all get to know him. We mainly talk about what we're going to do, where we are going to hike, and what we're going to eat. So again, fast forward to us driving along the forest's edge. We check for officers, and the area seems secure. So we pull off to the side of the road that we are on. We unpack and hop out. We wave and say goodbye to Greg's cousin, and then we head off into the woods for our adventure. The plan at this point was to hike for a few hours until we find a good clearing. So we hike a mile or two into the woods. It's been super nice so far. There's little amounts of trash, and we've seen a few chipmunks and squirrels. We hear the birds singing as well, and we definitely heard a few woodpeckers. And we reach this clearing. It's roughly 45 or 50 feet in diameter. The worst part of it was that there was a poison ivy patch on the northeast edge of the clearing. We made sure to avoid this area. So we set up our tents in the area, and then we build a fire pit and gather firewood, because why would we do that at night? Do you want a sprained ankle from tripping on the branches? After setting up our home base, we decide to hike some more and plink some targets. The hike is going very nicely. We see some geese flying in the distance in their familiar V formation. Unfortunately, we see a few plastic bottles and some bushes. It's sort of depressing and annoying. We see some Jewel Osco grocery bag stuck in a tree. We aren't exactly the Al Gore type, but Something about being so far into the woods and still seeing some lazy person's trash just really annoyed us at the time. Frank is somewhat good at climbing, so he decides to climb up there and pull it down. He sets his pack on the ground and begins the climb. The plastic bag is about 15 feet above the ground. It takes Frank about 3 minutes to get up to it. And, "Oh shit," he yells. "What is it?" I say. "Are you okay?" someone else says. "Yeah, I'll tell you once I get down." Frank untangles the bag from the branches that it was caught on and jumps back down to us. He says, "I saw some screwed up animal in there." What was it? It was a really mutilated raccoon. Man, how screwed up was it? Its head was smashed in, and its chest was torn open, with all the ribs looking broken. Also, it smelled like rubber. "That's gross. You didn't touch it, did you? It might have some weird disease." And he pauses for a second and says, "Oh, I never really considered that." He thinks back and realizes that he never touched it, but he says, "No, but I'm gonna put some hydrogen peroxide on my hands just to be safe." Someone asks, "What do you think did it?" My guess is that some hawk was carrying it, dropped it, got it back, and was in the middle of eating it when we showed up. It got scared and flew a safe distance away or something. And then I ask him, "So, what's your plan with the plastic bag now that you're stuck with it?" And he just says, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. What am I supposed to do with this? It's not like there's a dumpster nearby." So we tell him to just put it in his back pocket in the pack, and we get back to hiking. We've dicked around here for long enough, and to be honest, I don't want to have to be hiking in the dark. So we continue on our hike. And for some quick info, since I live in the suburbs, I'm used to seeing a bunch of fat and slow squirrels and chipmunks that run only if you're right next to them. So it's always sort of a weird experience for me to go deep in the woods and see timid and skinny squirrels and how rarely you see them compared to the suburbs. So I was already feeling a bit weird due to how far I was out of my environment. I told myself that everything was fine and that any weird feeling or concerns of mine were just from living around many humans and a lot of technology. I know that was worded kind of badly, but you get what I mean. I'm including this because I figured that it would be helpful so that you know more about my state of mind and my attitude toward the feelings in the woods. So anyways, we're marching along, and we see the sun just beginning to sit. I tell the boys that we should start to head back. So we start to head back the same way we came, because we don't want to get lost. By now, the sky has that orange-yellow hue to it that you sometimes get as the sun sets. It was quite pretty, to be honest. So we are passing the tree that Frank had pulled the plastic bag from. Greg trips on a large root that was protruding from the ground. He falls face first as his hands were in his pockets, which, to be honest, was kind of funny to see. He stands himself back up. I'm about to ask if he is okay when I see a large, brown, reddish stain on his jacket that wasn't there before. "The hell is that?" I ask. "Huh?" Max says. Greg looks down at his jacket, sees the stain, and starts freaking out. He starts saying, "What the hell is this? I just got this 2 weeks ago with Sarah," he yelled. Sarah was his girlfriend at the time, and if I'm honest, a solid 8 out of 10. Max grabs a longish stick and pokes at where Greg fell. He pushes some leaves out of the way and exposes the corpse of a possum. The corpse was not a fresh one. The thing had had its chest ripped open, with maggots all over it. Surprisingly, this one didn't smell like rubber. Seeing that the corpse was full of maggots, Greg started to freak out even more. He ripped off the jacket while screaming, Oh, for F's sakes, I got the little grub things on me. This is bullshit. God damn it. Or something familiar, or something close to that. Greg began to swing his jacket against a random tree, probably trying to get the maggots and blood off. Frank grabs a wad of dry leaves and handed it to Greg. Use this to try and wipe off as much scum as you can. And he says, "This is a handful of leaves. What the F am I supposed to do with these? I need a scrub brush and a hose," Greg barks at him. And then I say, "Hey asshole, shut up. Frank is just trying to help you. And for right now, that's the best cleaning supplies that you're going to hope to get your hands on. We're in the middle of the woods, remember?" Greg is about to fire a retort when Max chimes in. "He does have a point, Greg. You'll have to wait till we get back to our campsite before you can actually wash it. And it's just a jacket. Stop freaking out over some blood. Remember, we're on this to relax and celebrate our graduation. Yelling at each other and screeching about some animal, some gunk, isn't exactly my idea of relaxing." So Greg is able to get most of it off there, but there's still this fist-sized, reddish-brown spot left. So, now that we're done squabbling about that, we resume our hike back, with most of the sunlight gone. This inspires us to move at a much faster pace, since trying to find your way through unfamiliar woods at night is basically hopeless, and we can't just set up camp, as all of our sleeping gear was back at the clearing. Thankfully, we reach the clearing after roughly 30 minutes, and don't get lost in the woods at night. Maximilian gets the fire started, as me and Frank get the food out. Greg is trying to remove the possum blood with some dish soap, paper towels, and some distilled water we brought with us. Max asked us what food that we packed. Me and Frank take turns announcing each thing we packed as we pull them all out. Jerky, refried beans, Spam, the magical fruit. Wait, what? The magical fruit, Frank answers. You know, beans. Greg, who must have been listening to us, adds in, "I have literally never heard a sane person refer to baked beans as the magical fruit. Why do you call it that? It doesn't even look like it could be a fruit." My dad and his side of the family have a goofy little song that they sing whenever they're eating beans, Frank responds. "Want to hear it?" I egg him on, saying, "Sure, dude, who wouldn't want to hear some hillbilly song about eating beans? I'm not a hillbilly, you dick. Do you want to hear the song or not?" So we all agree, so then Frank says, "Okay, here it is. Beans, beans, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot. The more you toot, the better you feel. So I have beans with every meal. What you think? Funny?" Maximilian speaks first. I wouldn't say it was humorous, but I did find it funny to imagine you and 5 other grown-ass men singing that at the dinner table. Frank is pretty buff, and so are all the other guys in his family, so the image of 6 really buff men singing "The More You Toot" is absurd enough for me and my friends to get a laugh out of the song. So Franklin seems pretty pleased with himself with telling us this. The meal we decide on just so happens to be baked beans as well. Max yells that it's dinner time. The rest of us head over and grab a plate. Max serves us our share, and we sit down on some large rocks, and Frank immediately goes, 1, 2, 3, and we all break into that bean song in a sort of unison. We all cheer with the completion of our badly synchronized recital and begin to consume our dish. In the middle of the ritual of the consumption of the baked beans, we hear something. A loud shriek tears through the woods. I don't really know how to describe it, since I don't hear animal cries where I live, but rest assured, it was really loud. It was painful to hear, more than being in a room of people scratching their nails on a chalkboard. What the hell was that? Was that some sort of animal's death screech? I asked my friends. I've heard the screams of dying animals before, and that didn't sound like one. It was too loud for a dying animal to make, too. You'd have to be sitting right next to the animal for that kind of volume, Greg tells me. Max groans. Well, whatever it was, it made me drop my plate. I glance over at the ground in his direction. The poor dude's plate landed upside down. None of the beans survived. Greg offers some of his, and that little problem is solved. They all resume their meals like nothing happened while I sit stunned. What? That's it. None of you were the slightest bit concerned or even curious. None of you had the slightest clue what that was, so you just decide to ignore it? I guess so. What were we gonna do? Go out into the woods at night and try to figure out the source of that scary-ass noise? Replies Frank. Well, no, but then do your best to ignore it. We can sleep in shifts if you want. You can sleep in shifts. I want to get a good night's sleep, adds in Greg. Okay, but you're sure you're fine with this, Frank? I say. He says, yes, I am. Now stop squealing about it before I change my mind. So, I stop squealing about it and finish my meal. So Frank rolled up a couple logs around the campfire. They pulled up a stump. We head over and begin to talk around the campfire. We're sharing stories about college. As Max and Greg are telling us about some terrible professor they both had, I look over at Frank. He's staring wide-eyed past Max and Greg, deep into the woods. I follow his line of sight, and it takes a minute or two before I notice them. The hair on the back of my neck goes straight up, and I get goosebumps on my skin. I can see a pair of two yellow-orange eyes about 20 yards away. I'm not exactly able to tell how high off the ground they are. Max and Greg, noticing that no one is listening to them, and are instead looking into the forest, ask us what's so interesting. Right as they say this, something makes a loud snort or a grunt. This is followed by a really long growl, like a large dog's growl, but deeper, louder, and far more evil. I get up, and I now realize how big this thing must be. The eyes are at my eye level, and I'm 6'4". Max and Greg, who are the closest to the edge of the clearing, bolt off their logs and get to our side of the campfire. Frank snaps out of his gaze and grabs his revolver. He stands up and aims at the eyes, yelling at it to F off. The rest of us dart over to our tents and retrieve our guns and spare ammo. I load mine. We get in a line. We aim. Frank says, on a count of 3, fire. He counts to 3, and we fire. We shoot in semi-unison. We can't hear if we hit anything because multiple guns firing at once in close proximity on an otherwise quiet night is really loud. So, after a few moments, once I regain my full senses, I no longer see the eyes. But I know it's not gone. I just think, oh shit. One of us says, what the hell was that thing? Whatever it was, hopefully it's gone now. Okay, it looks like you've got your wish. We're definitely sleeping in shifts tonight, if we sleep at all, that is. We all reload and set up a sort of perimeter. You know, most people would not be proud of this. We just cleared out what would block our field of view. Basically all vegetation or rocks over 6 inches were just cleared away. We used the logs to make a barrier-ish thing. This, quote, barricade served more purpose for our own feeling of safety. It did not really serve any realistic purpose for defense. The forest is now dead quiet. It's really creepy. So here's our plan. 1 sleeps while 3 are awake. 1 man has the 1911, 1 man has the revolver, the other guy has the 4.22 one-shot rifles. The second a person sees something yellow or orange in the woods, they immediately fire a warning shot into the air to wake up the other boys and hopefully scare it off. Myself, Frank, and Greg take the first shift. All is well. The second shift is myself, Max, and Greg. At some point, Greg gets spooked by what he says is some shuffling in the woods and fires at it. Me and Max nearly jump out of our skin. Frank wakes up. We're pissed at Greg, but nothing else happens that night. So fast forward to the morning. We hastily pack up. We immediately go back the way we think we came, as we will somewhat have an idea of how far we must go. Greg says that he is going to check on the area that he shot at last night. We tell him to wait a few minutes so the rest of us can go with him, for safety reasons. About 5 minutes later, we are fully packed and head over to the area. We are looking around for signs that show that there was some sort of animal there last night. Max shouts out for us to have a look at what he found. There's a distinct trail of hoof prints, but they were not deer tracks. They were huge, and they were cloven. My blood runs cold. Greg is pleased to see that he was correct to fire. Max reminds him that if it was a human, he would be feeling otherwise. Frank says maybe it was a cow or a horse. I tell him that these woods are not exactly a good environment for a fully grown cow, and that it would have been much louder last night if it was a horse that Greg shot at. Greg stops. We are all thoroughly spooked and decide to GTFO. We begin our trip back to the highway. Our plan is to get to the highway before sundown and then try to hitch a ride. We make sure that our guns are loaded and head off. We are hiking through the undergrowth as fast as possible now. We aren't the fittest people, so we're not moving very fast. However, the hike back is very different from the hike to here. The landmarks are different, or look different, or are not there at all. Fallen logs that I remember to be covered in mushrooms are instead covered in thick layers of moss. This may not sound scary or disturbing, but when you're trying to get out of the woods, and you think there may or may not be something stalking you, it's different. These differences in the landmarks and the environment throw us off a bit. At roughly noon, we realize that we do not know where we are going. Greg begins to freak out. We all start to freak out. Like the dumbasses we are, we did not think to bring any sort of flares. It takes the four of us like 30 minutes to get our shit together. Thankfully, me and Frank had packed compasses. When we entered the woods, we went northeast. We decided that our best option was to go straight south. About a half hour after devising this new plan, Frank spots a half-eaten deer. The deer has had its stomach torn open. Its intestines were gone. Its thighs had been mostly consumed. Its eyes had also been eaten. This creeps us out more, but we aren't too concerned by it since Frank suggested that it was left behind by some coyotes, but I don't think any of us believed that for a second. I don't think that the other guys noticed this, but like 20 yards past the deer carcass, I saw 4 other half-eaten deer. At least one of them was a buck with a full rack of antlers. I choose not to tell them, as I believe that more fear will not help us escape the woods, and I was probably right to do so. Unfortunately for us, that first deer was not the only carcass that our group came across. Every 10 to 15 minutes, we would come across a new animal corpse. More deer, birds, rabbits, and squirrels, all of them partially eaten. All of them have the same parts of them eaten as the deer. Each corpse we find only adds to our anxiety and our fear, but we still tell ourselves that it was just a pack of coyotes. This possibility brings us a sense of security, however small. That is until we found a coyote, half eaten, just like the others. Judging from what was left of the creature, it was healthy and muscular. This shatters our theory that coyotes were responsible for all the dead animals. I don't know very much about coyotes, but I don't see why a pack of them would just turn on one, kill it, and then eat it in the same fashion as every other animal. Max is the first to put two and two together. The dude goes pale. It takes a second or two for the rest of us to catch on. This epiphany shatters our last nerves. We break into a full sprint in the direction that we've been hiking in. This part is sort of a blur. There's sticks hitting my face, thorny plants scratching my skin, and sheer panic. I have no idea how long we ran for, but when we stopped running and regrouped, my watch said 4:45 p.m. We have 2 hours before sunset. Thankfully, no one got separated or hurt themselves during our mad dash, so we are good to go. We recheck our orientation with the compasses and continue our trek south. We are no longer finding dead animals, which puts us at a little more ease. We start to believe that the worst is over. How wrong we were. The next half hour is very mundane, with the most action being Greg almost tripping and falling to a poison ivy patch. It was actually kind of relaxing to just hike through the woods, believing that the illusion that it's safe. But after that calm half hour, shit hit the fan, and fast. Max again was the first to notice it. He whispers at the rest of us to stay quiet. We shut up and we hear it. The distant beating of wings. If you have ever been close to a large bird when it's flying, then you have an idea of what it sounded like. The only problem was, there were no birds in sight. Hide, Max whispers. Each one of us scramble for a bush or a log to hide under. We are dead quiet. It takes what felt like hours for the sound of the wings to dissipate, but it was probably only 20 minutes. The hell was that? Asked Greg. I have no idea, but whatever it was, my guess is that it was responsible for all those dead animals, Frank responds. And let's try not to be the next one. We resume our journey yet again, but this time, we're all on high alert. We freeze at every branch snap, or a squirrel rustles through the trees, or a woodpecker. We are moving a lot slower, and it's getting closer and closer to sundown. Nothing really happens for a while. At 6:30, we stop to catch our breath. Orange is starting to appear on the horizon. I check my compass. We're still on track. We decide on what to do. Nobody wants to stay another night in the woods, but Max and Greg are against hiking through unknown terrain at night, while me and Frank are convinced that if we don't continue on, we are going to be a midnight snack for the thing that killed off all those other animals. I end up convincing them to go by pointing out the imminent danger of staying, and pointing out that the road that we came down here shouldn't be more than 2 miles away, which should only take us another 40 to 50 minutes. Unfortunately, this took a grand total of 15 minutes for us to decide, and the sky is orange and from the sunset. After 25 minutes, the only light is from the moon, and it's very bright as there are a few clouds. We have this old oil lantern that Greg brought with him, so now we are walking in a single file line with Greg leading the way, like a bunch of kindergarteners. And it's exactly here where shit hits the fan. Greg asks, "Hey guys, is it raining?" There are literally no clouds in the sky, and we tell him so. Then why am I feeling dripping water onto me? He asks as he shines his light of the lantern into the trees. And then we think, oh God, The light illuminates the face of the ugliest, most terrifying thing I have ever seen. It looked like a cross of a goat and a horse in its shape, with bright yellow goat eyes but without any fur. It opens its mouth and roars the same roar that we heard last night, but 1,000 times louder. Its gums are black, its tongue is pink, like that of a dog, and its teeth are almost as yellow as its eyes. This thing's canines were at the least 1.5 inches long. Its chin had a few dark brown or black hairs. The rest of it is not illuminated enough to make out. It catches us by surprise. For one long-ass second, we all look at it in a mixture of shock, fear, and awe. Then our fight-or-flight instincts kick in, and we bolt. It roars again, and takes flight. In the distance, we see the streetlights of the road, and run even faster. I'm crying at this point, with tears from fear and from joy that we're so close to the road. We make it to the road, and continue running down it. Max is ahead of everyone. I'm behind him. Frank is behind me. Greg is behind Frank. But then, Greg trips, stumbles for a second, and face plants. I screech to a halt and turn around and get a good look at the thing for the first time. Unless I ever get Alzheimer's or dementia, I will never forget the sight of that total abomination approaching my friend. It's a massive beast and has the same kind of muscle tone as a Russian powerlifter. It has the body of a hairless horse and is covered in scars of all different sizes and shapes. Some look like scars of a knife wound, others look like bullet holes. Its skin is this putrid pinkish red color. It has the hind legs of a horse, but instead of having 4 legs, it has a pair of massive, muscular, almost humanoid arms, with these humanoid-looking hands. The nails on the hands are at least 1 inch long, sharp-looking, and black. It has this long rat-like tail, I assume to be a length of probably a few feet, with sparse patches of dark brown or black hair. The abomination is so big and has to be 6 feet at the shoulders. Its neck is like 1 foot long, but probably like 2 feet in diameter. I now notice the long, semi-curved horns protruding from its head like those of a goat. You probably know what I'm talking about now, and if you don't, it's the Jersey Devil. It touches down on all 4s, like 30 or 40 feet in front of Greg. Greg fires his .22 at it and hits it square in the chest. It doesn't even acknowledge being shot at all. It walks on all 4s and reaches for Greg, who is in the middle of reloading his rifle. I don't want this thing eating my friend, so I call it every name I can think of. I can't remember which ones. I slide the bolt into place and take aim. I pull the trigger. I hit it right next to its eye. This it notices. It rears up on its hind legs, clutching its eye, roaring louder than a police siren. The roar is different this time. It's still loud and deep, but also has the sound of a dying cat, of pain. Max and Frank stop running and see the predicament that me and Greg are in. They draw their rifles and fire at it, drop the rifles and draw their handguns, and sprint over to where I am. This only seems to anger the beast more, as it grabs onto Greg. Greg screams in pain, and several audible snaps are heard. Max and Frank shoot at its torso. It throws Greg into a light post and begins to advance on us, and we back up. I see something behind it. A light. I squint my eyes. It's a cop car. I am hoping that he can call backup or help us shoot it. As the monster quickens its pace, the cops arrive. To everyone's surprise, the car slams into the monster. The monster is sent sprawling. 2 cops exit the vehicle and pull out very shiny lever-action rifles. I don't know what they were, but I think they must have been 45-70 government ones, and I start to shoot it. It screams like it did when I hit it in the head, and contorts its body in pain each time one of the cops fires another round into it. We get the idea and join in shooting. At some point, the abomination must have decided they were not worth the pain. It got up on all fours and ran into the woods. After we were sure that it left, the three of us run over to check on Greg. We make sure that he's still alive. He is. And then me, Max, and Frank talk to the police. "What the hell was that?" Max asks. They act as if he said nothing. "You boys sure are lucky that the two of us were driving down the road," one of the cops, a blonde, chubby guy, says. "Those rabid bucks sure are violent as hell, and a damn sure menace with their antlers. You were not packing anywhere near enough firepower." Me and Frank are about to call this lie, but the other cop, an older-looking man, gives us that death stare, and we shut up. "The only thing you ever saw attack your friend was a large buck with a bad case of rabies," he flatly says. "Nothing else." The cops get an ambulance for Greg and took us to the hospital. Greg had fractured his tailbone, several broken ribs, and broke his right shoulder blade. No one at the hospital asked us what happened after we tell them that it was a rabid buck. Frank calls up Greg's cousin and explains the scenario, minus the monster. The rest of us were fine, minus bruises and scratches. And there you have it. Greg recovered, but he'll never be as fit or capable as he used to be. The four of us still keep in touch, as our only validation that this was real, and that this really did happen, is the fact that we all know what we saw, and that we saw the same thing. I'm the only one of us who still enjoys hiking in the woods, but that's probably because I live in Colorado, far away from New Jersey or the Pine Barrens. But every once in a while, if I have an exceptionally bad day at work, or I go to sleep stressed, that abomination, that thing, visits me in my dreams. It chases me and my friends through the woods and down that road. Several years ago, I was studying business at a public college, and I hated my life, and this was in the early 2010s, by the way. So I was depressed, I had no friends, and this was a party school, so it was an accomplishment to not make friends here. I was even failing some classes. I had no extra job, no prospects of one. All I really had to my name was my Mosin Nagant. And during this stage of my life, when I felt that things couldn't get any worse, and I felt that I was at the bottom of the barrel, rock bottom, I lost my last close relative to an 18-wheeler accident. I decided at that point that I had had about enough of this. I grabbed my gun, a couple of boxes of ammo, some winter clothes, camping supplies, and 3 days' food. My plan was literally wandering off into the St. Joseph National Forest to die. And no, I didn't take a camera with me or anything, because I felt that it would just go to waste. After all, I was there to die. It was mid-December. It was very snowy out. I stopped at Walmart to buy another box of ammo and a few packs of Newport cigarettes. I saw this poster hung up near the toilet in Wally World. There was this cute girl that had recently gone missing, and I stared at her picture for a while, almost burning it into my memory. And then I was thinking these lonely thoughts. So I go to the bathroom, I leave Wally World, still thinking about this cute girl, and the thoughts were of how I'll never have one of my own, and how I'll never have a family, and all that stuff. So I drive out to Idaho, and I arrive at my destination. I step out of the car, into the cold. I still remember the feeling that it gave me, the crunch of the snow underneath my cheap boots. I unpack my stuff, I ditch the car, and I leave it unlocked for once. I start walking. I light up a cigarette, and I eventually lose sight of my car. So I hiked for a couple hours, probably in circles, and after this long, I started to realize it, so I veered off the trail and just started hiking through the woods. I was really drinking in the beauty of it all. It's such a haunting and desolate place in the wintertime. And I start running low on cigarettes, and I start to get the feeling that I shouldn't be where I am, a twinge of fear. I ignored it, as I was out there to die anyhow. I begin to feel like I'm being followed. I hear branches break behind me every so often, but I assume that it's just snowfall weighing down on the branches until they drop. And even now, that's what it could have been, but I still doubt it. I run out of cigarettes shortly before sundown, and I say, hell, in an audible, almost loud voice. I almost felt guilty for breaking the silence. That sort of feeling you'd get if you said like a bunch of swear words in front of your grandmother at church. So I set up this empty water bottle. I fired some rounds at it from 50 yards with the Mosin, and the echoes rang and rang out. And I didn't bring any hearing protection because, I was on a suicide trip, so maximum ear ring was the thing here. I pulled out a single round and I tuck it into my boot, and I'm thinking that I'm going to use this one for shooting myself later if I so choose. I took the backpack off to do the shooting, and when I went to grab it, I noticed movement in the trees, maybe just 100 yards away, and I noticed it because it was big. Whatever it was really big. I always had not so good eyesight. That's why the Navy wouldn't take me. So I figured in the moment that it was just a blurry-ass elk. I was standing there, staring at it, wondering if there are any elk in this part of the world or not. I started to get this funny feeling. Moving slowly, terribly slowly, I went to chamber a round in my gun. The bolt got stuck for some reason. I glanced down to see what the problem was, and when I looked up, it was gone. It was just like it was a ghost. Well, the worst it can do is kill me, right? That's why I'm here, right? Right? So I blow off the whole experience, and I quickly forget about it while I'm making my camp. I'm trying to get a fire set up, and finding wood is extremely difficult, as you might think, in Idaho in December under the snow. And it's being a real pain in the ass, so I get frustrated, and I have my little hissy fit, and I throw a piece of wood at a tree. After yelling at myself and screaming F you at the trees, I calm down, and I make camp all the way. At about sundown, I stop to eat, because I'm not going to die of starvation out here, and I'm eating my MRE, and I'm thinking, wait a second, why does this taste like blood? And then I realize that the air smells like blood, and I think, what the hell is going on here? It's the winter. And then I think, oh, I read about this, but I tell myself to relax, that it's nothing. And then I hear a distorted F you come from the trees. It sounded like somebody was talking through an AM radio. I leap to my feet, my gun in my hand. I'm spinning around and around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. I hear a branch break at my 9 o'clock, so I spin around and hold my rifle still. There's a fine dusting of snow that starts to accumulate on my rifle. After about an hour, I finally relax. I tuck myself into my sleeping bag, and I don't have a tent, not because that I'm out here to kill myself, but because I actually forgot one, and at that point I think, wow, I really am an idiot. so I fold the sleeping bag over myself without zipping it, and I sleep with my rifle in my hands, ready to go. I fall asleep with almost my entire body stuffed into the sleeping bag, and I'm awoken once again by that foul smell of old blood. It's the same as before, but stronger. I notice that my fire is out. I check my watch. I had slept maybe 2 hours or so, and I feel weight on my ankles. And I look down at my ankles because that's where my pack is. And then I think, wait a second, I didn't put it there. I realize that there's a tree that shouldn't be there, right at the foot of my sleeping bag. Then I realize it's not a tree. It moves a little. I swear I can almost hear it breathe. It's much taller than a person, for sure, and thicker. I was able to make out the arms, long, with these weird claw-looking things on the end of them. The arms were hanging loose by its sides. My heart is pounding out of my chest until that's all I can hear. I consider for a split second putting the Mawson barrel into my mouth and trying to end it all before whatever this is gets me. But the adrenaline takes over. I slept with my gun in my hands, ready to go in case something like this happened. I use the gun to flip the unzipped sleeping bag off me. I aim at the figure, and I fire a round. And I'm blinded, deafened. I leap to my feet, swinging the Mawson in front of me like a club and screaming. I slowly regain my vision, and I panic and scan the tree lines. It's gone. Maybe it's hiding behind a tree, just at a view, and then I think, wow, I haven't felt fear like this in my whole life. And I yell out, I'll kill you. I'll definitely will. F off, I will. And then somebody replies, a distant but clear, hello? Followed a second later by, are you okay? I replied with, who the hell are you? What do you want? The message came back, my name's Jim. Are you all right? I talked with it some more, all the while nervously scanning the perimeter. A couple other voices chimed in from the same direction, and I told them that I nearly got eaten by a bear. They fired off an orange flare, and I realized that they were actually a lot closer to me than I thought they were. They were just down over a hill. I'm pretty sure I passed through the clearing that they set up in shortly before I made camp. Can you come to us? I say, what if I get ambushed? Jim says, I'll come to you. I have a gun, but don't shoot me, okay? I say, deal. Please, hurry. It seemed like it took forever for homie to show up. We played a game of Marco Polo until he got to me. He had a stainless steel 357 and a flashlight. He introduced himself as Jim. He was a nice guy. He asked me if I was injured, and he was short as hell. I figured he'd be tall. He led me back to his camp and spoke to me quietly on the way. We've had these bear troubles ourselves, and even quieter, he said, ain't no bear man, you agree? And I replied, could not agree more. After walking a little bit, he says, the others still think that we just ran into a bear in the woods, and they're all pretty calm, so try not to spook them. We were having a party out here, and half of them are absolutely shit-faced. And I say, roger that. I ask, how many people do you have with you? And he says there's 6 others. We arrived at the camp, and the camp was in relative disarray. There was coolers and a couple of tents scattered around a low fire. There was beer cans everywhere, trash everywhere. And in a moment of humor to break all the tension, some insanely drunk, buck-toothed dude stumbles up to me, puts his hand on my shoulders and says, where's the bathroom, man? And I just think to myself that this is a shitty horror movie and we're all gonna die and no one's ever gonna find us. The only other gun besides mine and Jim's 357 is a 22, unless you count the flare gun. Jim and the kid with the 22, who introduced himself as Travis, convinced their inebriated friends to stop drinking in case the bear comes back. Jim systematically introduces me to everybody. The buck-toothed guy from earlier has stumbled into a tent and he is passed right out, as has one girl in the tent as well. I shake hands and exchange names with everyone else. Something is off now. I'm looking around at everybody, and I start to run some numbers in my head. There's 7 people total, 2 asleep in the tents. Why are there still 6 people out here? Jim dicks off to work on the fire, and I go to say hello to the last person, another girl. She just ignores this and stares at me. It's kinda dark, but I swear that her face looks familiar. And I see something move in my left peripheral vision. It's stainless steel. It's the barrel of Jim's revolver. He's pointing it at the person that I'm trying to talk to, slowly moving closer. Her face hasn't changed. It's totally expressionless. I get the feeling that I know her, and then I realize that I do. Her face matches the one of the missing person poster at Walmart. Homie starts to say something to the effect of, "Who the hell are you?" And then she wheels around and just goes into a dead sprint into the tree line, gone in an instant. People who saw it start yelling, "Who was that? What the hell?" And then that smell of blood comes back. I check my gun. It's loaded. We form a perimeter around the campsite. Over time, we make these expeditions to go to the tree line. We're panicking and gathering as much wood as we can to build the fire as big as we can. Everyone who isn't passed out drunk is clutching something. The 22, the flare gun, machetes, a hatchet, regular knives. Nobody says a word. We hear branches breaking off in one direction, and then more breaking in the same direction. And the smell gets stronger, and I think, oh shit, I wish I had my cigarettes right now. The girl with the flare gun sees something and fires a flare into the trees. Under my breath, I think, oh great, you wasted one. Then we see this silhouette, 15 or so feet from the flare, illuminated. I fire a round at it. It hits a tree. The thing bolts. People see it bolt and hear it run through the trees. It doesn't run away from the campsite. It just kind of stays adjacent to it. Branches break and people see things move around for another hour. Shadows and things of an arm, stuff like that. The kid with the 22 starts firing off rounds almost constantly at different stuff. He's scolded for wasting ammo. This continues. Jim grabs him and shakes him and tells him to knock it off. And I realize now that they look so much alike because they're brothers. As the melodrama unfolds, I hear something loud behind me. I wheel around and fire a shot at the blur moving towards the camp at lightning pace. I got a blurry, firelight look at the thing as it sprinted right through the camp. It grabbed a dude and tried to haul him off into the woods. The guy had a machete and hacked at it, and it let him go. He was curled in a ball, screaming. We dragged him back to the fire and calmed him down. The thing was big. It ran with a funny gait, but it was fast. Furry thing, big, oversized feet, and antlers. I swear it had antlers. Someone says, "Oh shit, Jimmy, are you okay? You see those claws, man?" And this thing circles more. All of us, myself included, started panic shooting into the trees. We're all running low on ammo, and it's only 3 a.m. The fire is burning low, and it starts talking to us, parroting back things that we've already said. "Jimmy, you okay?" "Running out of 357, guys." I almost hit it that time. A couple people start crying. I start to lose it myself. This thing charges again, right at me. I scream at it and sprint right at it. I bury my bayonet in its chest and pull the trigger. It tries to swipe at me with a claw, and it just goes over my head. It reels, pulls back, and darts back into the tree line. I chased after it, gun raised over my head, screaming. I get into the trees and saw it crouching there, 6 feet from me. It was dark, but I saw it. I looked into its eyes and just lost it. I lost every bit of courage that I had. I stood there, stiff, waiting for it to just kill me. I felt like hopeless prey in front of an apex predator. A couple people grabbed me by the shoulders and dragged me back to the fire. They didn't even see it, but it was right there. I only have 3 rounds left now. I used the snow to clean the black, steaming blood off my bayonet. The camp was still circled, but less so. We seemed to have injured the thing, and it didn't parrot us anymore. It just wheezed. This loud, terrible, awful wheeze. Maybe a cough or a shriek too. The sun finally came up. It was the most beautiful sunrise I had ever seen, I swear. They all haphazardly packed their stuff up. We hiked 10 or so tense minutes in a tight formation to a trail very close by. I had no idea that it was there. I followed the trail back to their pathfinder. They all jump in, and I'm stuck standing there. I remember my mission, why it was that I came there. I looked down at my rifle, 3 rounds left. I remember the bullet in my boot, 4 rounds left. And someone says, "The hell are you doing standing there? Get in the car. Man, get the hell in the car." I stop and say, "Sorry guys, I have unfinished business." And I start to walk back down the trail, back into the woods. I feel the crunch of snow beneath my boots, the rays of sunlight shining down. Then suddenly, darkness. I got knocked out and thrown into the pathfinder. They hauled ass out of there, and they swear they saw something big step out from behind a tree and watch them take me and drive away. We all agreed that we probably shouldn't go back there again. A lot of them didn't want to talk about it for some reason. I never did actually go back for my car. It was a piece of shit anyways. So yeah, that's the time that I was almost going to kill myself, but I guess something had other ideas. So usually I would add another story to this to make it like a little longer, but I feel like that this person's experience deserves its own, like it stands on its own kind of thing. So let me know what you thought of it down in the comments. Have you ever had something crazy like this happen? Do you have a story of your own? I have an email in the description where you can send it to if you want to. I also have a PayPal and a Patreon if you want to donate to the channel or become a patron. The tiers are like $1 or $2 or something, and usually what you get is I try to put the video up on there first before it comes out on YouTube, and that's just if I get it done in time, you know. But anyways, I hope you have a good week. And if you're ever struggling with mental illness or mental health, then don't be afraid to seek help. I know that I struggle with it myself, given things going on that I won't talk about. But it's important to take care of yourself sometimes, and to just know when to take a break, to know when to be able to sit down and recharge your batteries. Because if you don't, well, you're going to get yourself into a bad situation. And a lot of people who had tried to do that usually always regret it afterwards. So yeah, definitely seek help if you need it, because the world's crazy enough as it is. We don't need more depressed people or more people with severe anxiety going around just kind of without any support system or any kind of help. So, with that being said, I also wonder what goes on in these national forests. You know, you have like a lot of theories that the government covers up cryptids. There's like cryptids in there, that's why they're national forests. That the powers that be know these things are in there and stuff. But yeah, what do you think goes on in national forests? Let me know about that in the comments too. If I find any other crazy stories about national forests, I'll definitely post them on here. But until then, thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. So the other year, back in 2015, I went in a woods with my friend who's a super talented photographer for her school project. It was the end of the summer, and it was super hot out. I'm wearing this white flowy dress and a flower crown, there's leaves on my feet, everything is fun and feels like paradise, blah blah blah. Eventually, we get really deep in the woods, and we start taking shots of me holding a candle. My photographer friend says that it's a bit dark and the light sucks, so she tries to arrange the lighting and find a good position. We wander around for a minute or two and just admire the scenery. Suddenly, I see something dark from far away. I'm really curious, and I just go ahead warning my friend that there is something over there that I saw. We go up to it. It's a wardrobe. A big ebony wardrobe in the middle of the woods, like the wilderness. There's nothing around. As I get close enough, I stop. I am hit with this horrible feeling of dread in my chest. Suddenly, I feel cold inside, as if all my happiness has been taken away, sucked out of me. My photographer friend is a bit behind me, and she's been telling me that she's been calling me for about 2 minutes, but I was in some kind of trance. So I snap out of it and say, "Oh, this wardrobe is cool. We should take pictures here." But then the wardrobe begins to rumble and move. We're both startled. It begins to rumble and shake really heavily. We step back away from it. We're pretty scared. It stops. My friend and I are scared shitless, and we don't move an inch. Suddenly, we notice something is seeping out from the ebony doors. It's a dark liquid. I still don't know what the hell it was to this day. Again, we were scared as hell and ran away as fast as I could. My flower crown flew off, but I was scared for my life, to be honest. My friend collected her materials and stuff as quick as she could, and we ran out of there. She was on the verge of crying, saying over and over, "What the hell was that? What the hell was that?" We run away spooked. Later that day, we try to rationalize what happened, that maybe there was an animal stuck or something, but nothing explains that black liquid. On the way home, it started pouring. This has nothing to do with the story, but given how hot it was just weird and The fog and the wardrobe and the black liquid all kind of added in for the really spooky feeling. So this happened when I was 16. I was out walking with my friend in the marsh really late at night. We'll call him Billy. So Billy and me are sipping on whiskey, but we're not drunk, we're just a tiny bit buzzed. We're pretty far out in the marsh, maybe 4 clicks from the nearest asphalt road. And now that I think back on it, it may have even been 7 kilometers to the nearest house and 10 clicks to the nearest road. Either way, we're having the time of our lives, enjoying the stars and each other's company. We're just 2 good friends. We see a shooting star that looks weird. Instead of just burning up in the atmosphere, it looks like it's gonna land close by, and it does. Suddenly, everything goes silent, like we cannot hear the cicadas, not even a bird. It's dead silent and completely dark. The moon goes behind a cloud, and most of the night sky is just gone. Billy starts freaking out. He said he saw a deer or something, and its legs were the wrong way or something like that. Billy wants us to slowly go back down the way we came. I tell him that he must be drunk, and that made him see stuff. And he says, "No man, I'm not drunk. I know what I saw." And he's super serious about this, and it says that you can either follow me back, or you can go out here alone. I say, alright, let's go home, and it's a long walk either way. So, as we agree to walk back, we hear a human yelling, "No," off in the distance. It sounded human, but both Billy and I knew that it couldn't be. Not this far out, and not this time of year. And to make it even worse, even though it sounded human, it came from out in the marsh at a place we call the Bay, a place where boats are required to have lights on at night. We look at each other and agree that we just have to get out of the area, fast. Suddenly, Billy screams for help, but it wasn't Billy. He looks at me with skepticism. I say, "Did you hear that? That sounded like you when you broke your arm quite a few years ago out here at the Bay." Billy says, "We just need to leave now. We have to get out of here." Billy throws the whiskey bottle and tells me to start running. We have to have been running for 30 minutes, just on pure adrenaline. When we stopped to look back, we could see 4 pairs of eyes looking at us. At this time, we decided to just run and not to look back anymore. We kept hearing their voices. "We need help. Come quickly." Screams and random sentences being yelled at us from out in the marsh. As we reached the gravel road, we finally slow down and look back. There's no eyes, and we haven't heard the yells in at least 10 minutes. Now, I'm from Northern Europe, and we have a myth about this sort of thing. Apparently, back in the Bronze Age, the people who got sacrificed in the marshes had a risk of not dying, and instead becoming Marsh Men or women, and they would haunt around in their corpse. But if it's true, it's sort of a thing that has become like the things you tell kids so they don't stay out late at night. But yeah, I think we saw the Marsh Men. So a few years ago, I went on a houseboat trip up the Murray River with some family. Nothing happened until we got pretty far up the river. We crossed over into the next state, into some reserve, I think. My dad and brother-in-laws decided that they wanted to go fishing, so I stayed back with the missus and my 2 sisters and my mom. We're sitting on the top deck drinking and talking and just having a good time overall. The girls decide to head inside. I lag behind a bit to grab a drink out of the esky. As I'm going down the stairs, I hear a young girl scream across the riverbank. I scan the bank, but I don't see anything. But just the way that scream was made my gut turn, because we hadn't seen people for over a day or more. So an hour or so later, the missus asked me to accompany her on a short walk. We trek in a woods a fair way. And just a note, if you've never been or seen the Australian bush, it's as thick as a 70s porn star's bush, meaning you can't see more than 3 meters in any direction. And after a while, we break into a clearing, and we find a rabbit's warren. It's abandoned, but there's no sign of foxes or cats yet. In fact, there's no sign of any animals, not even kangaroos for that matter. I get that bad feeling in my stomach again. We keep walking and find a dried up riverbed. Suddenly, the smell of death floods the air, like not just dead rabbit, but like rotting rabbit guts, basically. I don't have a gun on me because it's Australia and it's a family holiday and we're supposed to be having a good time, not hunting. So I'm feeling naked, exposed, and hunted. I pick up the closest rock to me in case I need a weapon, even if it's just a makeshift one. The missus starts getting worried and says that we should head back. I agree, but the smell follows us all the way back. So does the feeling of being hunted. But nevertheless, we keep going, heading back to the boat. I keep my wife in front of me at all times. I decide to steer her toward the riverbank, but away from the boat. As we get closer, the smell fades, but the feeling doesn't. We break out of the scrub at about 100 meters from the boat. We make our way back there, but we don't mention what happened, because they will just call us nuts. Nothing else of note happened till later that night. That night, we both woke up from a dead sleep at the exact same time. All of a sudden, we hear what sounds like barking coming from the scrub. It's definitely not a dingo or any dog I've heard before, and I grew up out in the bush. Then, another starts barking, and another. I can hear them, but they're a fair ways apart, and then the barks do get closer. When they're a few 100 meters away, they go silent. One more bark, and this one was on the riverbank. I get out of bed against the wishes of my wife, and I peek out the window, and I see something where her and I came out from earlier. It's very hard to make out, but it almost looks like an anorexic person that's kinda slumped over. It's like sniffing the ground. I nope back into bed, and I just go into that scare child mode. Whatever it is, climbs onto the boat. I felt the boat shift when it climbed onto the corner. I hear it pacing past our window. I lay there until the sun comes up. Whatever it was, eventually got bored and left. The next night, we're closer to town. My 2 brother-in-laws are drunk as all hell, basically wasted, making a bunch of noise by a campfire. We hear this ungodly howl that comes from up the river. They start howling back because they're drunk. There's this silence for a bit, and then that little girl's scream echoed from down the river. It sounded like a person with a pole through their neck trying to scream. We all just went inside the boat. I haven't gone back, and I probably won't, to be honest. So I have this story of when I had to travel to Nevada for family stuff, and this was in March or April of 2019. I just got my license then too, and I had to travel with my dad's side of the family to Nevada, near Humboldt National Forest. My dad's brother had unfortunately passed away, so we were going for a funeral. My uncle lived in the middle of nowhere, no neighbors or anything, and my dad got a rental car. So fast forward a day after we arrived. We want to get takeout, but the closest place is forever away. But I was that hungry, so my dad gave me the keys to the rental. It was a 2017 Honda Civic, and it was about 9 p.m. when I left. It takes about 15 minutes to get to the place, but I was craving pizza that bad. Around 10 p.m., I was driving down the road with nothing but woods surrounding me. I was listening to music, but it was pretty low. And suddenly, I get a horrible feeling, like a really bad pain in my stomach and a general uneasiness. I get a sudden feeling of being watched. I'm not sure how, as I'm going 60 miles per hour on a road with no other cars in sight. I look in my rearview mirror, and immediately I see something running behind my car right in front of the trees. I can't see it that well, but it's keeping up with me, and it looks to be at least 7 feet tall. I've heard stories about these things, about skinwalkers and such, so I have a general idea of what it is, and I immediately go, nope, and I put the pedal to the metal. I'm now riding 80 plus, and the thing is still keeping up with me. I don't know what to do, so I floor it even harder. Right as I stop and look around, a ways up the road, it's gone. I felt like pissing my pants. I was paralyzed with fear. I was too scared to start driving again, but too scared to sit there. I see something about 10 feet into the woods, and in a moment of not thinking straight, I turn off the music and roll down the windows. As my eyes adjust to the darkness, I can see a silhouette running away from me. There's no footsteps, but I can hear branches being broken and leaves being crushed. I floor it to the pizza place. I get in there and I buy my pizza. I'm pale as the white Civic that I was driving. The cashier asked if I'm okay. I say that something was chasing me. I straight up tell her what happened. She says that it happens semi-often. Most people simply ignore it. She asks me if I'm from around here. I tell her that I'm visiting family. She says that if I see it again, on the way back, to just act like it isn't there. And I think, how the hell am I supposed to do that? On the drive back, I'm just scared shitless, but I don't see it on the way to the house. I tell my dad and my uncle's wife about it. My dad thinks that I'm just bullshitting or being paranoid. He doesn't believe in supernatural stuff. My uncle's wife then interrupts him and says that actually around here it's kinda common. My dad still isn't sure. She tells us stories of encounters that she has had. As I'm going to my room, she asks me a question. Hey, if anything sounds off tonight or seems odd, please tell me, okay? My first, or second red light is that this isn't over. So at about 3 a.m., I'm sleeping in the guest bedroom on the second floor, and I start to hear faint noises from the woods. Even though I'm still scared, I tell myself that it's just foxes or some random wildlife. The noises become louder as the time goes on. Every 10 to 20 seconds, it sounds like a screech. I've been hunting a lot where I live in North Carolina, and it's definitely not a fox or anything. When the screeching gets loud enough to interrupt my attempts to sleep, it stops. The house gets real quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Suddenly, I hear a rabbit squeal and a couple of squirrels chirping. My window was slightly open, as the heat in my room was unbearable and I couldn't turn it down. I think, it's probably just a fox or a wolf hunting rabbits. Suddenly, I hear a noise. It was a meaty slap. I literally have no way to describe it, but it sounds like just someone smacking like raw meat against their hand that's full of ranch dressing. I'm preparing to be terrified again. I grab my flashlight and I slowly creep my way to the window, and I get a good look at whatever it is. If it's what my fear is, I'm gonna spring as fast as I can into my uncle's wife's room. I have no idea what force compelled me to peer down into the backyard. As I look down, I see quite possibly my worst nightmare, a gray figure with a deer-like head hunched over a gore fest of a rabbit. I didn't know rabbits even had that much blood in them. The dude was just sticking his fingers into its guts and licking the blood off of his fingers after. About 2 seconds after, I get the light on him, and he gives me a stare the likes of which most likely rival God himself. Its eyes were completely black, not even a reflection of the light from my flashlight. I was paralyzed with fear. He stands up slowly. I get a better look at him. It's about 7 feet tall, very thin, matted down fur all over the place, with certain pieces gone. All the while, staring at me, taunting me. His face looked like a pale deer head, with large swaths of flesh missing. It opens its mouth, but there's no sound that comes out. My head starts to hurt. It's like something is burrowing into it. I try to let out a scream, but nothing comes out. My vision starts to fade, and eventually everything is blurry except for the creature in my hands. I finally scream. Right as it gets out, I fall over and I pass out. As I'm falling, I can just barely see him run off at breakneck speed. My dad and uncle's wife run into the room. I don't remember anything after this, but when I woke up, apparently all I did was stare and point to where it was standing, the remains of the rabbit still there. The next day, I tell my dad that I really don't want to be here anymore. My uncle's wife tells me that she is going to get some stuff and leaves. She comes back with some spices or something I don't remember. She spreads them around outside, and she burns some kind of herbs, but there wasn't sage, I don't think. She says that he probably won't be back. The rest of the trip goes by without a hitch. I was freaked out the whole time. Apparently, she wants me to come back in a few months. She said something about the thing is bothering her property and her non-stop, and that I might have something to do with it. Screw me, I guess. So I lived in a small town of Vancover Island for my entire childhood, and I sure did see some weird stuff. So a few years back, when I would say, younger, I was camping with my dad and my brother. Our campsite was near this large river. I don't remember the name of it. The river had very strong currents. It was strong enough to pull away a full-grown man if you were unfortunate enough to get caught out there. So one night, I go out to pee, and I bring my trusty flashlight. I'm peeing in the bushes on the beach by the river, and I hear this ungodly screech from the other side of the river. All the hair on my body stands on end. I shine my flashlight across the river and start scanning the beach. I see the reflections of 6 sets of eyes in the bushes. I see one set of them moving toward the river. It looked like if a wolf and a gorilla had a child. I start backing away. I felt safer because of the river, but then this thing just started wading through the water toward me. I start running back to my campsite, and I hear the screaming from these things behind me. I wake up my brother and my dad. I told them what was happening. We leave everything and get into the truck. We see these things, 3 of them, running towards our truck. We floor it and drive away. We come back the next day to get our stuff. Our tent is wrecked and everything is strewn about, but nothing was taken. Now I know what a Sasquatch is supposed to look like, but I think this thing was different. It looked like what some people might call a dog man. This is only the first story about witnessing strange things in the forest. So this isn't Dogman related, but it happened when I was a teenager. I was sneaking out for the first time, and I was at this park with a girl and her friends. It's around midnight. The park is connected to the forest, and we're playing Truth or Dare, as all teenagers do. I get dared to run naked through the woods. I think I'll seem cool, so I do it. I'm running for like a minute down a path. It's unusually windy. I'm getting kind of scared because I keep hearing what sounds like grunting or some kind of weird noise just in the tree line. I turn around because I'm getting really freaked out. Ahead of me on the path, I see someone walk out from the trees. It's an old guy. He appears to be native. He starts screaming at me to come over to him. I try hiding in the bushes. As I'm hiding, he grabbed onto my wrist. I see that his eyes are a milky white, like he's blind. He starts trying to talk to me or communicate me in his native language. He seems terrified as well. He lets go and starts pointing toward the park, so I get the idea, so I run back and put my clothes on. I walk out to see my friends hiding underneath a picnic table. Apparently, a very large bird, almost the size of a dog, flew into the playground, and it started screeching at them while I was gone. Fast forward a year later, we're doing a class about First Nations people, and I'm doing some research for a project, and then I find an old story about a blind old man who can control animals. He would stop evil creatures from coming into the villages, so he would also scare children away from going into the woods at night. So that just makes me think that there was something out there in those woods with me that night. So here's the story that my uncle will only talk about whenever he's really drunk. It was the mid-90s, and he was in the Ozarks of Arkansas. He was going on a solo camping trip in the late summer, and he brought his new SKS. So he packed up his stuff, he got in his truck, and he went into the woods. He was driving to a camping spot that he knew about in the St. Francis National Forest. So he unpacked his stuff off the truck and he headed off into the woods. As he walks, the amount of light is entering early twilight. He gets to a spot that he likes, he sets up base camp, a tent, a fire, the whole shebang. He pulls out his SKS and loads it, and chambers around, in case anything decides it wants to sneak around his campsite. He sits around the fire for a few hours, just reading a book and eating beans. Now, it's dark. As he eats his food, he starts hearing less and less sounds in the woods. It's not like one of those situations where everything stops. It just kind of slow. Like first the cicadas stop, then after a while, he can't hear the frogs anymore, and then the crickets, and then everything else. He notices, but he doesn't think too much of it. This happens normally, all the time, depending if there's a predator around. After a couple more hours, he decides it's time for bed. Before he goes in to sleep, though, he goes and gets a bunch more wood to pile on the fire to keep it going. He heads a couple yards outside of the light of the fire, and while picking up logs and sticks, a faint stink is picked up by his schnoz. My uncle takes a mental note and heads back. He throws the wood on the fire, and he settles into the tent with his gun. He's asleep for maybe a couple hours. He awakes due to a repugnant smell. His brain turns on, and he immediately thinks that it's a big bear that's outside of his tent. For those that don't know, there are hybrid black-brown bears in the Ozarks. They smell terrible, and they're super stupid, but they're dangerous because of their size and aggressiveness. My uncle grabs his gun instinctively. He hears walking around the border of his camp. The footsteps are walking in a spiral, getting closer and closer into camp. The smell is unbearable at this point. Something finally walks into the camp and starts rummaging around his pack for food. He's debating on what to do. Either shoot the bear and get arrested for poaching, or just fire near it to scare it away. He takes the second option, and he sticks the barrel through the tent opening. He sees the ass end of what he thought was a big bear. He aims the gun out the side of the bear and pulls the trigger. The bear stops rummaging. My uncle always said that it was just like a movie. The quote bear turned super slowly and stared at him. It turns fully and it hits my uncle. This is not a bear. It turns and he sees human-like hands holding a bag of chips. The creature's body was vaguely humanoid, but covered in thick, matted brown, blackish hair. The face was long and had a bullet-shaped head, and its eyes were deeply sunk into its skull. Its nose looked like a troll nose, hanging down with huge nostrils. It had blocky teeth and a strange look on its face. The weird bear-human hybrid thing stood from all fours and stared at my uncle. My uncle kind of stares back at it, almost in a trance. He snaps out of it and fires a shot, center mass. Dust and grime puffs off the thing's chest from the round hitting it. The creature winces and makes a pained roar. It coughs up blood and then gets back on all fours and runs off, exactly like a bear, from my uncle's camp. He reloads and steps out of the tent, and he's looking side to side to see if it's still there or if there's more of them. He slings the gun and he starts shoving the stuff back into his rucksack. He finishes repacking and just stomps the fire out. And during the situation, he's not thinking straight and is afraid, and he ends up catching his pant leg on fire. Once he puts it out, he starts heading off in the direction that his truck was in. While he jogs/walks back, he keeps seeing something in the corner of his eyes, and he hears movement all around him. He's halfway as he is coming by a bend in a trail. A huge rock lands right in front of him. He looks at it, and then another rock lands behind him. He's standing there, and more rocks come out of the trees, whizzing over his head from his 9 o'clock. He unslings his SKS and mag dumps. After this, he just takes off. He runs all the way back to his truck. While he runs, he keeps hearing multiple things running around. He gets into his truck and speeds off. He gets back and just drinks to forget it. He's only told me this story, like I said, when mega drunk. Whenever I ask about it when he's sober, he says, "Don't talk about that." So yeah, that's my uncle's Ozark Bigfoot encounter. So this happened when I was 23, back in 2014. I was doing one of the stalker challenges in a woods. This was in Arkansas in the Ozarks. I was with some new gear that I had been saving for months. I had new boots, a tack vest. I even had a military surplus gas mask. It was like Christmas for me. Being where I was, and wanting to field test some personal prototypes, I had my Nagant on hand. Wouldn't do much against big bears, but it would ruin any snake, or stray dog, or cougar's day right to hell. I had a couple strippers and 2, I call them clipazines, that I built, and I wanted to field test these. They were in my pouches. I also had some rolled up targets stuck in my loops, and a light complement of survival gear. I had a compass, topographic map, thermal blanket, spare underwear, extra ammo, MREs, a canteen, and a camelback. Along with those, I had amphetamines, bug spray, rope, spikes, a mallet, an e-tool, shower powder, baby powder, toilet paper, and the works. As you can imagine, I was quite well prepared, and I've done nothing heretical to my Nagant if you're a gun person. I swear these clipazines are what I call jerry-rigged magazines that I custom built from old cannibalized magazines in sheet metal. They fit right into the Nugget's feed if you pull up the floor plate. I've also done some Heinlein-esque mods to my gas mask, an airtight, at least now, water feed, but I digress. Basically, I was out there practicing for the inevitable collapse of civilization and when everybody turns on each other and we all have to survive. So essentially, I was having a blast, romping through the woods, playing with my field of view in the mask, testing the reliability of my clipazines, and just genuinely having a very good time out in the deep woods. So as I was romping around, I wandered next to a creek bed, and I decided that it was time to practice my guerrilla tactics. It was late summer, early fall, so there was no danger of getting my gear wet in the non-existent stream. There was more of a danger of the water damage from my sweat than anything. After triple-checking my safety, I proceeded to do a series of scree slides and uphill hustles in full survival gear. Needless to say, I got winded really fast. So there I stood, panting in the middle of that dry stream bed, and I decided to check my position with my topographic map and compass so I could set a course for home. In the middle of orienteering myself, I caught wind of a smell, and no, it wasn't anything like blood and copper. At first I assumed it was just sweat and body odor, but the funk quickly evolved into something much worse. It had a dark undercurrent of rot, deep notes of animal musk, a bassy score of raw garbage punctuated by garlicky timpani, and a thick black score of something in between skunk and rotting onion sludge. Basically, a symphony of stench, and the conductor decided to skip the adagio and drive the opening movement straight into the scherzo, because that shit was getting stronger. I went into straight operator mode. I popped an Addy from my pouch for extra focus. I took out the homemade clipazine from my Nagant. It was working fine, but if I was gonna have to actually face off with something, I'd prefer to not have any risk of it jamming. I gagged at the smell and nearly puked that Addy tab back up. The smell was that strong at this point. Whatever the source was, it was definitely mobile and getting closer. Screw it. I pulled my mask up from around my neck and I pulled it around my face. It helped slightly, but at the time, my dumbass waterline wasn't 100% airtight around the joint. I walked cautiously and slowly along the creek bed to where the slope was the shallowest. I was listening for any twig snaps or animal sounds from above. I definitely heard something shuffling around up there, and it sounded bigger than what my Nagant was up for. It was a near constant snuffle grunt and sloppy, uncoordinated crunching around bark and leaves. That, mixed with the smell, my mind immediately jumped to big bear, a rabid big bear. Now, let me tell you about Ozark big bears, straight from my dad's mouth. Dad's lived in the Ozarks for 58 years, and in that time, only two things have managed to shake him: the challenges of fatherhood and the big bears. According to him, the native black bears were hunted to near extinction between the 40s and 50s. To correct this, the ANRC, NRCS, and Arkansas Fish and Game Commission released 250 bears into the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains. Their website insists that they were all black bears. My dad insists that that's bullshit. According to him, more than a few of the bears released into the Ozarks have been brown bears, and that they interbred with the few remaining locals and the reintroduced black bears. Thanks to a little phenomenon known as hybrid vigor, the resulting offspring were bigger and meaner than their parents, and also fertile. When I asked him to prove it, he simply left the summer porch, went upstairs, and came back with the manila folder labeled BB. He pulled out a couple of Polaroids and asked me to take a look. What I saw was a big and brown something rooting around behind a clothesline. My dad directed my attention to the clothesline about 50 feet away from us, strung between two poles, at about 5'6" off the ground. The same clothesline in the picture. That something's shoulder was about a fart's length underneath the clothesline, despite it being in the background. I looked through the other pictures. One of them was rooting in the trash. Another one was barely concealed by trees. All of them were slightly shaky, and so detail was hard to come by, but I was convinced. My dad told me two things that would have to avoid getting my shit shredded by big bears. One, big bears are stupid as shit. It's something to do with them being hybrids. This makes them more dangerous than other bears because they're not afraid of you. It also makes them smell like shit. And if you smell them coming from a mile off, you should just hide. Get inside, get upstairs, and lock the doors and take the shotgun with you, and bring some deer slugs. And two, if you do see a big bear, and you're not at home, and you don't have a shotgun loaded with slugs, hide up a tree. They're faster than you. Running won't do you any good. And the reason why I tell you all this is because after 23 years, I'd finally managed to prove my dad wrong about something. Well, half wrong. There's something in the Ozarks that match my dad's pictures of big bears, but whatever they aren't bears. So back to the woods. I would have stayed in that creek bed and waited for the something to screw off on its business, but the light was already slanting through the trees, and as bad as my dad made big bears sound, I sure as tits didn't want to be stuck with a goddamn rabid one, especially after dark. I instead opted to climb the opposite edge of the creek bed. I had to scramble over some big rock outcroppings, and I half stand, half leaned against the slope of a hill. But I figured if anything, that would be one more layer of protection against this something. I had gotten a few glimpses of the something over my shoulder as I climbed, but this was my first good look at it. I just stared. Like I said previously, this wasn't a bear. It was bear-like, but not a bear. Now I've been into sci-fi my whole life. Cue the Heinlein-esque mods to my gas mask, and I even got Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials from my awesome late stepmom. So when I saw the something for the first time, my nerd brain immediately went, oh, it's a Sulador. Except it wasn't. It looked like a Sulador, a grizzly bear, and a sloth had a three-way on top of a garbage heap to make whatever this was. It had a long prognathous snout like a stubby trunk, big, angular shoulders, feet that looked like manhole covers covered in dirty matted fur, and a body like a blimp. Its fur was the same charcoal black, day-glow brown that I saw in the pictures. It was full of mats and clumps of dirt. I mean, I just stared at it, drinking in the details, trying to make sense of what it was I was looking at for a solid 2.5 minutes, and it somehow hadn't noticed me. These things were indeed pretty dumb. I remember feeling a twinge of relief. If it hadn't noticed me trying to scrabble out of a rocky gully, it probably wouldn't notice me sneaking away. But then, I farted. The something stopped. My breath stopped. My heart stopped. The only sound in those woods was my fart echoing and the sound of my nose blistering under the something's odoriferous assault. Like slow-mo, the thing turned its head, looked back at me, sniffed the air, and stood up. It had been shuffling around, crouched low to the ground the entire time. What I had thought were shoulder blades were its elbows. It could tie its shoes without bending down, but its paws probably would have crushed its Air Jordans to bits, like they were trash can lids. It sniffed the air, and coughed, barked like it was asking me a question. Gorp. I swear on my mother, that's what it sounded like. Gorp. So, being me, the dumbass who doesn't listen to his dad, and being the awkward guy who farts when he's trying to sneak away from a goddamn Gorp, I aimed for the center of mass. I fired. The bullet didn't thwack into the Gorp because, hey, if you're gonna die, you may as well give your killer a stupid name in your head, right? As much as it thwumped. There was a puff of dirt and hair when it made the noise, and, bless my luck, the thing flinched from the impact. I waited for blood. I guess that they're so covered in nasty flea-ridden hair mats that over time the poor hygiene gives them a natural body armor, because that thing didn't bleed. What it did do was rear up and make another noise at me, a low growl that my colon decided was a warning because it was producing bricks enough to construct a barricade. I worked the bolt and fired another shot, this time at its ugly, sloth-like, bare elephant face. This time it thwacked, and so did the dirt a dozen feet into the thing's left because it ricocheted off its skull. The Gorp just stood there, staring at me, like it was too dumb to realize that it could have stood at the stream bed and grabbed me by the face when I pelted it with useless bullets and essentially crapping my pants out in the woods. I yelled at it, and I fired a third shot in any direction at all, just trying to scare it off. The Gorp, or big bear sloth thing, whatever it was, dropped to all fours, lurched toward me once, then did a 360 and shuffled away. It worked. I stood there until the sky turned from blue to orange before I snapped out of it, and I tactically retreated back home. When I got back, I told my dad everything. I probably should have mentioned that it was him I was visiting for a few days. He could probably smell whatever it was on me, so there's no use lying to him. When I got to the part about what the big bears really were, he refused to believe me. Then he got mad. Then he locked all the doors and camped out upstairs for the rest of our visit. I had to bring him beer from downstairs when we wanted to shoot the shit. The weird thing is, as scared as he was, and as weirded out as I was at seeing my dad as spooked as a kid who's seen a skeleton, I wasn't scared. I remember that clearly. I wasn't scared. I guess you could say I was just too interested to be scared. If I was, I would have just bolted, and I probably wouldn't be typing this right now. But if I had to guess, it was probably that Adderall that I had popped that kept me from switching into fight or flight. It later occurred to me, after talking to some people and some research, that it was most likely indeed a giant sloth. So, although I was convinced for the longest time that I had seen some kind of Native American spirit monster, or an escaped government project, or one of those other things that people always talk about, but there are definitely giant ground sloths still living in the Ozarks. I'm gonna call my dad. So I was in a cultural exchange program in high school, where I would spend my summer in Norway with a host family. My grades were much better then. They didn't really go to hell until I got to college and got depressed. But, regardless, I saw a lot of weird stuff while I was there. This is just the first thing to come to mind. I was living with a family that ran a farm in Norway. I was working essentially as a part-time farmhand in a place that was a good ways outside of the nearest town. The terrible thing was the internet. Absolutely spotty reception and very slow. But it wasn't supposed to be about that. It was supposed to be a cultural enrichment program. But honestly, it felt like that I was basically hired to be a farmhand, and they got free labor out of it. But that's besides the point. I did have a very good time during my stay there, but back to what I'm talking about. Oh, and the food was good too, and I got to know some friends very well. One boy was older than me, 16 at the time, a girl about my age, and one younger sister who looked like she was 5 or so. But anyways, one night, a few weeks in, there was a bad storm coming. Like, a really bad storm. So I helped them batten down the hatches, so to speak, and I ran inside, hoping to just wait out the storm with everybody else. But then, we hear the mom yelling like a crazy person. She says that the youngest daughter, Hilda, is missing. I'm asked to help find her, and I oblige, even though I don't really know my way around any of my surroundings, and I'm pretty sure that there are rules against this. But I didn't want to say no, and I didn't want anything to happen to the kid, so I'd go along with it. We search for hours in the storm. Mom and the older daughter go back in when the wind goes crazy. Me and the older brother, who I always called Chad because he looked like the meme, go back in a bit later. The dad stays out for over an hour, but he has to come back to the house too. He looks even more like a drowned rat than anyone else. Everyone just agrees to hope that she's smart enough to find a place to hunker down and pray that she's okay until the storm lets up. It stops raining elks and polar bears sometime the next day. I go out to search the mud and hailstone-infested land around the house with the family for another hour. Thankfully, we find Hilda walking around like nothing happened. Her clothes weren't even wet. The family was ecstatic. They take her home and scold her for disappearing, but not too much. They were just happy she was safe. But something never set well with me. She was in the middle of nowhere, no cover anywhere nearby, and we left as soon as things were safe. There's no way she could have been so unfazed by everything, and the dry clothes make no sense. So I asked her a couple days later, "Where did you hide during the storm?" She said, "I didn't hide anywhere." I ask, "Oh, then what did you do during the storm?" She says, "Someone helped me, but I didn't tell anyone else in my family because he said not to." Right now, I'm slightly creeped out. I was a little worried that somebody had kidnapped her or something, so I asked her who helped her. She said, "The one-eyed man." At first, I thought that her imagination was running wild, as kids do, but nothing explained why she was okay during that awful storm. I know for me, I would have definitely died if I was lost in a storm like that. And all the other weird stuff that I saw later on made me think that she may have had a run-in with something. She acted normal for the most part after that storm, save for a couple weird changes. She took a sudden interest in horses for some reason, which her parents mentioned, albeit in an offhand comment, was something that she never cared about before. She also wanted to go outside whenever the weather got rough, something her mother was against for obvious reasons. I asked her why she wanted to be outside when there was a storm or a bad wind, and if it had anything to do with the one-eyed man she mentioned to me. I told her that I could tell her parents about it. She looked at me with that creepy, dead-faced expression that only a child can manage and said, "You don't want to do that." Now I might be a bit of a short guy, a bit of a guy that doesn't have a spine sometimes, but a child cannot intimidate me. But this was the single most upsetting thing a child has ever said to me. Something about the way she said it creeped me out to no end, but I decided that I should probably tell her mom about it the next day anyways. That night, though, I had a dream that I was by a stream, which I suddenly turned into a fish. I think it was a herring or something, but I can't remember. I started getting pulled downstream when a bird plucked me out and started shoving bread and some kind of spices in my mouth, like you do before cooking. I woke up to the sound of my window shattering. As far as I can tell, the wind might have picked up that branch and flung it through the window above my bed like a javelin. Even though I didn't see anything outside, I didn't know that there was any strong winds. It felt like the universe or something, was sending me a message to keep my mouth shut. And at that time, the message was received. I never told her mother about the conversation I had with Hilda, but thankfully, her escape attempts were not successful, at least during my stay there. The next thing that happened is a little weird, but comparatively short. The work I did changed from day to day, but I had one duty I had consistently done every night, and that was to take a bit of cheese, milk, and whatever uneaten food is left over after dinner and leave it on a plate outside of the barn. I asked them why once. The mom thought it was just a silly superstition, but the dad said, "Don't worry about it, just do it." Again, at the time I was a bit spineless, so I didn't question it, and I just kept taking out those leftovers. That is, until one night, when I had a very long day, a very tiresome day. I was so tired that I just dumped the leftovers in the trash and went to bed. I slept well, the best sleep since I got there. The next day, the barn is an absolute pigsty. Feed bags have been ripped open, water barrels tipped over, animals all let out of their pens, and literal shit everywhere. To top it off, there was a pile of shit in my work boots, which I keep inside. The dad, who I'll call Olaf from now on, walks up to me and slaps me on the shoulder before handing me a broom. He says, "You forgot to bring the plate out, didn't you?" He wishes me luck and tells me to clean it up. In other conversations, I heard them talk about what I think they called a Nissa, and I think whatever that is what I pissed off. Olaf said he wasn't superstitious, but this apparently happened to him when he was around my age, and happened to Chad once too, when they had also been tired and did not bring the plate out. I wish that either of them told me beforehand, so I could have known, and maybe my feet wouldn't smell like shit all summer. On another occasion, it was a light work day, so Chad goes to fish in a lake nearby. His sister, who I'll call Astrid because why not, decides to go along too. I follow for the same reason. We don't catch much, but the change in scenery was nice. Plus, being near Astrid without her parents nearby was fun. After a while, we realize that she walked off somewheres. Chad and I go off to look for her. I start to yell out her name, but we get no response. We circle back eventually to the spot where we were fishing, and I see wading out into the water, somewhere just out of sight, from around that area. I yell for her. There's no response again. But once she gets about waist deep, she suddenly falls in. I charge toward the lake. I get in and grab her shoulders and start pulling her back as hard as I can. Just as I start trying to pull her out, I see something farther in the water. It's murky and it's full of whatever, but I can clearly make out a pair of hands around her ankles. My eyes grow wide and I start yelling for Chad, struggling to keep Astrid's head from going underwater. Chad comes running, holding a wooden axe he says he carries when he goes far away from the house for emergencies. He runs over and chops at the shape that we can both make out in the water. Suddenly, we hear this unearthly scream, which is weird because it was under the water, but we still heard it. And then this snaps Astrid out of her weird trance. The water around Astrid's ankles turns black, like tar, slick black. We all run away like little girls and agree to just not talk about this again, try to forget that it happened. But it didn't end there. I wish I could say it did, but the next morning, Chad woke up, sweating like a politician taking a polygraph test, and sick as hell. He gets worse over the next couple of days, until Olaf's dad comes to visit. Olaf's dad, who I think his name was Siegfried or something. This guy was big and still pretty scary looking for an older man. He had begrudgingly moved into the city when he started showing signs of dementia, and they started becoming a problem. I hear him, Olaf, and a very disoriented Chad talk in Norwegian for a bit. I speak a little conversational Norwegian that I had learned before I came there, but I could not keep up with what they were saying. They were using lots of words I have never heard before. The talking turns into yelling between Siegfried and Olaf before he grabs my arm and pulls me out the door. That child is too damn stubborn. You're showing me where this lake is, boy. Show me where the fight happened. He grabs the youngest lamb on the farm while Olaf is yelling at him in Norwegian and loads it into the truck. He yells at me to ignore Olaf and get in the truck. I was scared shitless because of this. This old guy, in the early stages of dementia, still looked like he could break me in half, and I didn't know what exactly was going on, but I knew that letting this man go off by himself would be a bad idea, so I got in without question. He drives off, and I point to him where Chad took us to fish. He yanks me out of the truck and tells me to carry this lamb while he grabs some things. I show him the spot where Astrid was getting dragged into the water. The land and the water's edge was still black from the other day. He yelled something in Norwegian. I didn't understand most of it, but I looked it up later, and it translated roughly, from what I can remember, to something like this. My damn fool of a grandson took off your arm. I'm sorry, but it was his job as an older brother to protect his sister. I came with a peace offering. He grabbed the lamb, shoved a bunch of spices down its throat and 2 coins, and tossed it into the lake with its feet tied. Suddenly, there was a lot of splashing that within seconds ends. The next day, Chad had made a miraculous recovery. Every so often, once every other week or so, Olaf would drive his family down to visit Siegfried in his house in the city. He had a nurse, but was pretty self-sufficient for the most part. She mostly just checked in and made sure that he was taking his medicine, that he was eating healthy, and helping him with whatever he wanted. Since I was part of this program, and not just an indentured servant, even if I was usually treated that way, they took me along whenever they did something like this. I also think Olaf didn't like leaving me behind at the house. Obviously, I'm technically a stranger. They would come in, greet Siegfried. He would usually make some offhanded remark about how the farm was being ran wrong, and then he would start spending time with the grandkids. He would usually start telling stories, either old fables, fairy tales, or something that he was told when he was a kid, or just stories that happened to him when he was a young man. I barely understood most of it, so I would just sit around reading, or talk to Olaf and his wife about whatever. That was until the lake incident. After that, Siegfried must have taken a bit of a liking to me, because he started telling me his stories in English. something all of his grandkids spoke anyways, and I could actually understand. The couple of times that I was there and he would be speaking English, I could make out some very interesting stuff. And this is all to set up for something he told me once after a visit. As everyone was leaving, he pulled me to the side and asked me something. He said, "How old are you?" I said, 16, sir." He said, "You still live on the farm, right? There's going to be a fog the next few days." I asked him why that matters. It's just fog. He said, "My son and grandkids are fine. They can't take anyone else from my family, but someone young like you might be in trouble." I start looking visually creeped out. He says, "If you hear voices in the fog outside the property, don't panic, don't run, and whatever you do, don't turn around. If you show any hesitation or fear, they'll take you. Just turn to face the house and walk calmly away. Don't turn around until you're inside." Olaf calls for me. I tell Siegfried I'll try to be safe, and I leave. This all sounded like nonsense to me, but the lean so far was starting to make me much less of a skeptic. And about a week later, there was one of those rare days where there was nothing to do. Unfortunately, I was still on a farm where I beat the sun awake, so I took an early morning walk in the fog. After about half an hour later, I find myself at a bit of an unmanaged tree line. I was about to turn around. I heard a voice. It sounded weird, kind of Norwegian, but kind of off, just odd. Even today, I don't remember exactly what it was, only that it sounded like a very loud whisper, like a woman reading poetry into your ear. I saw the fog churn, like something was moving, just out of sight. When I heard the laughter of what sounded like children, several children, I knew that it was time to perform a nope and leave. I started to sprint out of there like a bat out of hell, but thankfully, I remembered what the old man said, so I made a face about as calmly as possible and started just speed walking away. The whisper and laughing kept getting louder. It sounded almost seductive in between giggling. I almost lost it when I felt a tug on the back of my shirt, and then another, and then two more, and a tug on my pant leg. None of them were particularly strong, but not knowing what was trying to pull me back into the fog was really creeping me out. I sped up slightly before I felt a pair of hands around my shoulders and a weight on my back, like I was giving a piggyback ride. I couldn't make out anything besides a few vague shapes moving in my peripheral vision. I probably could have seen something if I turned around, but seeing that Siegfried apparently knew this stuff with the lake, I thought the better of it, that I would continue to remember his words. The weight slowed me down, even more so after I felt a pair of hands wrap around my legs, like kids do when they want you to drag them along. I should say, at this point, I was actively avoiding looking around me or looking down for fear of letting them know that I was scared. But even then, I didn't really see anything except for a few weird shapes in the fog and at the edge of my vision. The giggling got louder and louder until I suddenly heard barking and growls coming from behind me. I heard some screaming and yelling coming from that direction, and I had the sudden feeling that I was being chased by something, and that something was getting closer. Against all logic, I just kept walking as fast as I could without breaking into a total sprint. I heard everything from roars to cries to the sound of fire. At one point, I even felt claws dig into my bag at one point, though I later confirmed that I wasn't actually injured. This kept up until the house was in sight. The weight dropped off. The sounds died down. The closer I got to the house, it was like somebody was slowly turning off a volume knob. Once I got to the porch, I walked in. I closed the door as calmly as possible before turning and running to my room and screaming into a pillow. I had other run-ins with fog creatures, but nothing ever so intense. This was the scariest shit that ever happened to me in my entire life. I later asked old man Siegfried why he wasn't worried about his family. He said, "They can only take one person from a family. They already got one from mine." Now this one isn't a first-hand story, but something happened that Siegfried told us when we were there. Keep in mind, some of his stories were told by an old man with early stages of dementia, speaking in his second language to his grandkids, which included a 5-year-old. So a lot of them were a bit rambly, and some were obviously exaggerated. One of them had him kill a troll to rescue his sister. He killed her with an axe. Although seeing as how even in his old age he looked like he could bench press a bear, I didn't find that so far-fetched. This one, however, he claimed was entirely true, and got defensive if anyone said anything to the contrary. As a bit of a setup, Olaf's mom disappeared when he was around 12 or 13, about a year after his little brother was born. Chad once told me that some people in the family think that Siegfried killed her because he thought she was cheating, and that Olaf didn't like mentioning her because of it. That, of course, is not how Siegfried tells the story. When Siegfried was a young man, somewhere between his late teens into his early 20s, he was never that consistent with it. He had to burn charcoal for the farm. If you don't know anything about making charcoal, you basically heat wood until it turns black, and then you can use it as better fuel. It's a tedious process that takes a long-ass time, and it's boring. But while he was doing this one day, he saw a woman in a short dress approach him. He asked her, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Oh, I live nearby. I heard there was a handsome man nearby, so I just had to come see him." She sat on his lap and wrapped her arm around him. She looked him in the eyes and asked him if he wanted to go kiss in the woods, and he would always make an exaggerated kissy face whenever he told this part. Now keep in mind, there was also the 5-year-old listening, so he was probably self-censoring. He told her that he couldn't, and that he needed to tend the fire. She was disappointed, and stood up before leaving. The next day, he was doing the same thing, and like clockwork, she came back. She tried to get him to follow her into the woods, which he denied. However, this time, he set a second plate of food beside him, and asked her if she wanted some food. The work was boring and tedious, and having a woman to keep you company was a welcome distraction. She was a little shocked, but agreed. They spent the next few hours just chatting, telling jokes, and getting to know each other. When he left, he told her to come back tomorrow. It was like this every day for a few months. She would come by, ask him to follow her into the woods. He would deny and ask to share his lunch with her, and she would look disappointed before agreeing and spending a few hours with him. After about a week of this, he apparently got to see that she was hiding a cow's tail under her skirt or dress. He never elaborated on how he got to see this, or if she was hiding it because Hilda was there, but use your imagination. It was obviously to him that she wasn't a normal person, but at this point, he just liked talking to her, so he kept spending his lunch there, even on days when no farm work would bring him to that part of the property. After a few months, she stopped coming. He got worried, so he set up another charcoal burn and left out a plate of what I think he called crumb cake, which is a sort of waffle cookie dessert that he knew that she loved. He waited there for over an hour until she came out, looking upset. He asked, "Why did you stop coming?" She said, "You must think I'm too ugly to be around." She sits down with him and starts eating with a frown on her face. She told him that she realized that he would never kiss her and that she couldn't bear to be around him anymore. He told her that she would have to marry him before he did that, and proposed. Hilda asked him where Grandma's tail went that night. He says, "Oh, that came off during the wedding night." Chad and I laughed, Astrid cringed, and Hilda looked really confused. Hilda asked where Grandma went. Siegfried looked pretty sad when she asked him. He leaned over and stared at the ground. He said she had to go home. "I miss her every day, but I wouldn't change the choice to marry her for the world." He never did give anyone a straight answer as to what happened to his wife, and she didn't have a grave as far as I know. All I do know is that she was essentially an absolute bombshell, if any descriptions are any indication. I wish I could show you what she looked like, but my phone was just awful, and I didn't have a very good camera either. And this is the last one that I have for you for now. I don't have many more that involve me that weren't small or repeats of the fog or the storms making Hilda weird or me hearing voices. All that being said, while this isn't necessarily the scariest brush with the paranormal, it's probably the closest I came to dying. A sheep got out one day when I was about a week off going home. If you don't know about sheep, they're all some of the most dumb farm animals on the planet. So I get sent out to search a part of the land that I knew probably had no sheep there. I was looking through some dense woods when I came across some lingonberries. I started eating them. It was a little early in the season, but I wasn't going to complain. I grab what looks like the ripest, and I put them in my hat. I stop to take a break after a while, and I sit down. I look away for a second, and I look back to see a raccoon eating the berries out of my hat. Something about this looked weird, but I didn't notice it in the moment. I try to shove the raccoon. I fail. I pick up my hat, and I move on with half of what I picked gone. I angrily search more until I smell what I think is blood. Nervously, I follow my nose until I come across a sheepskin that looks like it had been slaughtered recently. I WTF before I feel a sharp pain in my head. That trash panda had followed me and chucked a rock at the back of my head. I pick up a rock to reciprocate before I have an audible realization. I don't think there are any raccoons in Norway. This thing makes this unsettling smile, the sort of thing that shouldn't be possible with how an animal's jaws should have been shaped. Whatever this thing was, somehow it knew what animals were familiar to me, and it was deliberately trying to screw with me. I drop my hat and the rock before running away as fast as my legs could carry me. I hear this deep, rumbling laughter boom through the forest. I swear I felt the ground shake. I see a sheep's skull fly past my face and hit the tree so hard that it breaks open. I start screaming, "I'm sorry," in Norwegian, the best I could while I ran. I eventually got out of that part of the woods when the laughter stopped. Whatever this shape-shifting thing was. It must have gotten its kicks for the day and left me alone. I lie and say that I didn't find anything, but I searched enough to say it's definitely not there. I asked Siegfried about it a few days before I leave. He tells me that it is harmless so long as I didn't take anything of his, and that the sheep probably ate grass off of his land. I realize that I ate fruit, I think. Great. Siegfried's eyes go wide. He tells me that I should leave something of value at the edge of our land before I leave, just to be safe. I buy a lingonberry pie and my cell phone, which I was due for an upgrade anyways, at the border of the woods that I found him in, along with an apology written in my best Norwegian. I'm not dead, so apparently it worked. I live in central Alaska, a small town surrounded by undeveloped wilderness for hundreds of miles in every direction. During the winter, we get very little light, even during the middle of the day, and this is something that happened in 2014 in early February. Me and my friend Scotty were out snow machining about 3 hours away from town. We were relaxing and having fun for a day, not hunting or camping or traveling anywhere in particular. We had been out for a while, and it was cold and getting dark, so we decided to try and head back. About 15 minutes in, my snow machine dies. No sputtering, no clunking, no outward signs of anything wrong before sudden engine failure. Scotty hears my engine die, stops and comes back to help. We pop the hood and start looking around to see what the problem could be. As we do this, the sun sets and the darkness sets in. I pull out a flashlight so we can continue to examine the engine. It wasn't out of fuel. The oil was relatively fresh. There was no previous engine trouble earlier that day. We can't figure out what's wrong. I'm starting to get frustrated. It's cold, dark, and we are in the middle of the woods. We didn't bring much food beyond a few snacks, and we didn't bring a tent either. We decided to abandon my snowmobile for the night and attempt to two-man it back into town on the one remaining vehicle. No more than 5 minutes later, Scotty's snow machine dies under the same circumstances. While inspecting the second engine, I notice a pale light in the forest. It doesn't look like an electric light. It's not flickering like a flame. I point it out to Scotty, who looks, sees, and goes silent. It's too dark to see him clearly, but I could tell that he was holding his breath. After some time of mesmerized staring, we noticed that the light was gone. It was as if it had faded so gradually that we barely noticed it go. I tried to return Scotty's attention to the engine, but he seems completely disinterested. He suggests now that we seek shelter in the trees around us. I agreed with this. We stumble through thigh-deep snow to a cluster of nearby pines, illuminating our path with flashlights. Everything around me is pitch black. The only thing I can see is the empty branches of trees and plants that fall under the eye of the flashlight. I was already frustrated, but as we were slugging to the trees, I suddenly felt as if ice-cold water were being poured down my back. Within moments, a very loud beeping, like those emergency alert broadcasts, began to come from what seemed like everywhere. I shouted in fear and instinctively collapsed into the snow. I waved my flashlight around everywhere, freaking out. The beeping wasn't stopping. My flashlight finally finds Scotty. He's standing still, about 30 feet away, just staring at me. His face is deathly pale. His flashlight had fallen into the snow next to him. In this moment, To my terrified mammalian brain, he looked like a dead body being suspended by invisible meat hooks. I shout his name, but he doesn't move. He begins to open his mouth to try and speak, but he can't form words. Looking at him standing there like that, not able to form words, is making me freak out even more. The beeping noise, which hadn't stopped, is getting louder and more aggressive. It begins to sound more like a machinist shop, like angry grinding and scraping of metal on metal. My muscles felt like they were on fire and wouldn't respond. I tried to force myself to turn away from Scotty. The strange light was behind me now, gently illuminating the snow. What happened next felt like slow motion. There was a shape in the sky, only a few feet above the surface of the snow. It was oblong, wider than it was tall, with no exterior lights or details. It seemed to give off a very pale glow. Whatever it was large and completely silent. I recall being frozen in fear, completely paralyzed. My limbs felt like they were frozen tree stumps, immobile and unresponsive. The mechanized beeping noise rapidly became louder, overpoweringly loud. I tried to scream, but I heard nothing but the beeping, which had completely taken over my senses. I began to have tunnel vision, but I could not look away from this shape, floating silently no more than 100 feet away from me. In the cold darkness, this thing had seized complete dominance over all my senses. My skin began to burn, and it felt like my bones were liquefying in my body. I heard Scotty shout, as if from a great distance. I heard 2 gunshots, muffled and soft. I thought I had gone deaf. At this, the mechanized beeping stopped with the horrific, abortive grunting noise, and the shape silently ascended. The moment it got above the tree line, I couldn't see it anymore, even against the backdrop of stars. Scotty came up behind me, screaming hysterically, grabbing my jacket and pulling me along as he sprinted to the trees. We dove under a tree, kicking out a rudimentary snow shelter. Neither of us slept the entire night. We sat there, huddled in our hollow snow mound, underneath the pine trees, until the sun finally rose late the next day. We followed our tracks back to Scotty's snow machine. It started on the first try. We drove back to where we had abandoned my snow machine. It too started on the first try. We rode back home in a daze. The whole trip was just silence. We've talked about it a couple times since then, but both of us kind of just want to forget about it. This is something that happened in the late 2000s. I was 17 or so. I was going out fishing with my dad in this really swampy, marshy area that's down the river. We were up at dawn to paddle down in our old canoe. My dad brings the .22 Winchester lever action, just in case. We get there at around 8 a.m. or so. The water's only a foot or so deep in some places. There's lots of reeds everywhere. At times, it gets so dense and the river gets so narrow that you can touch the reeds from the middle of the river. Dad and I are floating in this shaded area that fish love, with big willows on both sides of the river. Eventually, I get a bite. It feels like a big one, too. After about 2 seconds of tension, the line goes limp. I reel in the line, expecting a broken line or a dead fish or something on the other end. Instead, I get a lure or hook that's bit clean in half. I think, what the hell? That's weird. I show it to my dad. He thinks that it's probably just a snapping turtle or something. For me, I'm not so sure. So fast forward a couple hours. We don't catch anything. This is weird because this is normally a primo fishing spot. You can practically scoop them out of the water. But this time, there's nothing other than that first bite. My dad decides that it's time to go back, so we grab our paddles and start going back. Almost immediately, we hit something. My dad says, "Huh, I didn't know there was a rock there. I guess it's lower tide than normal. Push it off, I can't reach it." So I say, "Will do, Dad." I go to push off of it with my paddle. The paddle seems to sink in a bit, almost like it's mud covered in grass, or that cornstarch and water stuff that you do in science class. I manage to get off of it though. I glance behind us as we get underway. I see this grassy, muddy-looking hump sink into the water, and I think, that's weird. I continue to see this hump out of the corner of my eye most of the way back. I mention it to my dad. He freezes and goes pale. He asks me to describe it to him. I do. Immediately, he paddles straight for shore and pulls the canoe up as well. He shoulders the .22 and starts scanning the water. I am really weirded out and confused. I say, "Dad, what's going on?" He says, "Son, there are some things that I'd rather not be in the water with out here." 5 minutes later, he says, "I think it's gone. Slide the canoe back in the water, will you?" I push one end into the water. I grab the end to keep it from floating away. I step 1 foot into it. I'm about to throw our fishing stuff back in. Then I hear this sound that's a cross between a crunch, a snapping, and a grinding noise all together. I look back. The first 6 inches of the canoe is just gone. I say, "Holy shit." My dad starts screaming, "Get back here and get down, now." I dive back onto land. I just said screw the canoe. And then my dad starts firing wildly into the water where the bit of the canoe used to be. I guess the thing was almost on the surface because a bit of blood floats up. It doesn't look like fish blood though. It looks almost green or blue. The canoe sinks. My dad says, "Well, I guess it looks like we're walking home." I pick up all of our stuff and we start to head back. 3/4 of the way there, we come across this inlet or stream thing that branches off from the main river. It looks pretty deep. The water itself is only 4 feet wide, really wide banks. I try and step down into the bank to jump across, but my foot sinks about 2 feet in. I think, oh, here we go. But I manage to pull my foot out and save my shoe as well. It looks like we're waiting then. I find a piece of the bank that isn't soft as hell. We start waiting, and then suddenly, the hump is back at 3 o'clock. I yell out to my dad. We both start to double time it across this stream. My dad is firing at it. He keeps hitting it, but there doesn't seem to be any visible effect. It just speeds up. I manage to get out. I throw our shit on the ground. I pull my dad up behind me. We scramble off the bank, and Dad keeps firing at the hump. Suddenly, it moves forward and up the bank. My dad is out of ammo. It gets just a little bit out of the water. It honestly looks like a hippo in a ghillie suit. Then it opens its mouth. There's row after row of sharp-ass teeth, almost like a shark would. It has longer legs, longer than a crocodile. It roars or hisses or screeches at us or something, and then sinks back into the water without a trace. We made it back home without incident, but we were both really shaken up. As you can imagine, we never went fishing in that area again. Hello everyone. I want to share some creepy and strange stories that I know. Some of these were told to me by my relatives, mainly my grandfather, or other acquaintances. I have also encountered some unexplained incidents in my life. I will also write some stories that I have published in the local newspaper. In some stories, there may be moments for foreigners that could be odd, but I'll try to explain them. I did not change anything in these stories. If there are any distortions, it is because that I have heard or read these stories a long time ago, and my memory isn't what it used to be, so it could distort them. I hope you enjoy them. Also, sorry for my English if it sounds odd. I don't write big and complex texts very often. But first, some basic information about the Republic of Yakutia. Yakutia is located in the Far East in Russia, the largest subject of the Russian Federation in terms of area. However, the population density in it is one of the lowest in Russia, around 1 million people. Winter is long and cold. The average temperature in December and January is around minus 50 degrees Celsius. Summer is short, hot, and dry. The average temperature in June and July is 35 plus Celsius. About the religion. The ethnic Russians, around 40% of the population, are Orthodox Christians. The Sakha people, or Yakut, are around 50% of the population. Mostly have a Yakutian version of Tengri faith and shamanism, and some have a syncretized version of Tengri and Orthodoxy. There is also a smaller Siberian culture there, like Ivans, Ivanks, Yukagirs, Dolgans, etc., but I don't know a whole lot about their culture. But the Yakut are a Turkic nation with some Mongolian and Tungusic influences. But enough of that. I'm here to tell some stories. This first one is from my grandfather. So he was just a kid. He decided to go for a walk in the forest with his friend. They end up going further than usual. They come upon a strange structure soon after they get out of the known parts of the woods. It's a shaman's grave. At first, they're scared, but they decide to investigate. A shaman's things are obviously found near the grave. A shaman's tambourine is there. Gradually, their fear recedes, and they start to play with these things. They decide that it would be nice to show these new cool things to the other children in the village. So, they're back on the road to the village. On the way back, they saw a rider on horseback that's heading toward them. This was the headman of the village. He looked at the children's things and asked where they got it from. They told him how they found these things. The headman got angry and worked out some basically UFC style moves on them. He urgently took them to their parents in the village, brought them to their parents and told them what happened. The parents were also enraged and, you can imagine, give them a slap or two, maybe even more UFC moves. They still have to decide what to do. There's a female shaman in a neighboring village. They go to this village. They go to her, telling her what happened. She says that she sensed their approach in advance, and a ritual should be prepared if they want the children to not be in serious trouble. The woman prepares for the ritual and asks them to go outside. She leaves her house and starts talking after a while. She says, "I did what I could. You should put the things back in place and beg for forgiveness. Then you will understand whether the shaman forgave you or not." The kids did everything she said. The next day, my grandfather's friend wakes up and found out that he can no longer speak. From that day on, he never regained his voice. He lived a long life. Doctors and healers tried to heal him, but all attempts failed. This is story number 2 from my grandfather. He was, again, a kid, but a little older. He was playing with his friends in the forest near his village. It's getting quite late. The campaign is going home. My grandfather goes to his house alone. On the way, he meets a strange, old, thin and tall man. He doesn't recognize this person. This strange person walked up to my grandfather and spake. "What are you doing out here this late, at this hour? Go home quickly. Your little sister misses you. Your grandmother is going to cook your favorite pancakes. Your parents have finished their work and are preparing to have dinner now." This strange man went further down the road. My grandfather thought that it was a family friend who came to visit from a neighboring village. He returned to his home and sees that everything is just as this person had said. He started asking about this person. The family said that no one came to them today. My grandfather told them how he met this man and described his appearance in as best detail as he could. His parents and grandmother became very scared. The man's descriptions matched to one of my grandfather's grandfathers who died long, long ago. My grandfather's grandfather was a dark shaman. Moreover, he was a ravenous shaman. In the Sakha religion, there are 2 types of shamans, white shamans and dark ones. White shamans are serving the gods. They mostly give blessings and heal people. Dark shamans were sort of like, I guess, a gray Jedi. He could use the forces of both upper and lower worlds. But if they could not cope with the inhabitants from the lower world, they would lose control over their own body, and those entities would take control of you. And this is what happened to him. He became a ravenous shaman. Ravenous shamans are obsessed with harming people, primarily their relatives. This event took place at the end of May in 1941. A few weeks later, my grandfather's grandmother died suddenly. Soon, his parents died of hunger and illness due to the war. My grandfather and his sister were sent to an orphanage, where they later were taken from there by relatives and raised. Fast forward from there to another story that my grandfather told me. He was somewhere around 25 years old at the time. He was going to meet his old friend who lived on the other Ulis, another region of Yakutia. Once they meet, there is a celebration. They drink vodka. They decided to go fishing on a local lake the next day. The next day, they arrived at this lake. They started fishing. There was no fish. A few hours later, there's no more fish. My grandfather becomes angry. He says, essentially, "What a shitty lake. Why is there no fish here?" My grandfather's friend got nervous. "I wouldn't dare to say that. You know the rules. You should ask for forgiveness." He says, "No, I believe in the party and Lenin, not in superstitions." His friend says, "It's your choice, but I would be more careful if I were you." In Sakha religion, respect to nature is one of the most important things. When you go out into nature, you shouldn't speak loud. You shouldn't drink. You shouldn't throw garbage. You also should never insult the place where you are, because the spirit of this place can hear you, and it will get angry. So, fast forward some more time. Evening comes. My grandfather and his friend laid in sleeping bags on the shore of the lake. It was very late at night. Through a dream, my grandfather feels like someone is slowly dragging him toward the lake, attempts to wake up his friend who is sleeping next to him, but he can't move or speak. The lake is getting closer and closer. The water is touching his feet. The water has reached his waist, and yet he still can't move. My grandfather gathers all of his strength and starts to cry. The paralysis goes away immediately. There is no one on the side of the lake. His friend comes up to him and asks what happened. He tells him what happened. He says, "What a fool you are. I told you. You're lucky. If it wanted to kill you, you would not have gotten the chance of salvation." Since then, my grandfather stopped doubting in the presence of supernatural powers, but he remained a true believer in the state. Now this one is one that happened to me in the summer of 2007. I was sitting there watching TV. My parents were at work. My grandmother was preparing food. My grandfather is on the outside doing some kind of outside work. I'm having a pretty good day. But then suddenly, a frightened grandfather bursts into the house. He says not to approach the cowsheds under any circumstances. My parents are called. After a while, when he calmed down, he told us what happened. So, he was outside. He went to go check the cowshed. The cows are gone to graze, so the cowshed is empty. He decides that he wants to clean it, so he heads toward it. But before he does this, he stops in the other cowshed that's more abandoned and is just used for tools and food storage. So he goes in there and starts looking for the things he needs. Suddenly, he hears either a roar or a hiss from the far corner. In the far corner, my grandfather sees the silhouette of a child, a very thin child, a child with glowing eyes, and a strange head shape. He freezes in fear. Where he stood, there was a stick for stirring livestock feed around his hand. He picks up this big stick and throws it toward the face of the child thing. The child opens its mouth as if to scream, but nothing comes out. My grandfather runs to the exit, locks the barn door, barricades it, and comes into the house. They call several people to come over late in the evening. I was sent to my room on the second floor of the house, but I could hear some conversations happening downstairs. After a while, everyone goes outside. I was forbidden to go with them, and instead told to go to bed. The next day, everything was as if nothing had happened. My grandfather refused to acknowledge or say what happened. He would just say that everything was going to be okay from now on. I have a theory on what it could be. In the mythology of Saka, there is an evil spirit called, essentially in English, a calf demon, which kills livestock, mainly calves, and it feeds on their life energy. Usually, it appears as a child in a cow's skin. It makes screams like a cow's lowing. Usually, in order to stop it, people call shamans or other people. I read somewhere that to exorcise a spirit, it is necessary that the person who noticed it first pierced it with a knife. Then, the evil spirit will disappear. This next one is something that happened to a classmate of my older brother. So, it was 2005 in the fall, and he was around 17 years old, I believe. They decided to go alone on foot to shoot ducks. They eventually got to the place and shot some ducks. It was getting late in the evening. He was collecting his things when he hears a noise in the bushes nearby. It was too dark. He couldn't see anything. The source of the noise was getting closer and closer. The young man began to get nervous. He called out, "Who's there?" The noise stops. His fear only increased. He heard somewhere that when a suspicious activity starts, he must say, "If you are human, then come here and talk. If you are not human, go away." But he was not a smart person. He was kind of dumb, and was also very afraid of everything at the time. So, he confused the words and places. He said, "If you are human, then go away. If you are not human, then come here and talk," essentially. All of a sudden, it goes black. He wakes up in the morning in a nearby forest. He feels deathly ill. Everywhere on him, there are scratches, bruises, and other abrasions. He doesn't remember anything that happened, or after his speech from the night before. He returned to his camp. All of the ducks that he killed are gone. Everything from his camp is irreparable. He decides to just go home. People said that he periodically gets panic attacks and nightmares. After school, he went to Yakutsk, and I don't know about his destiny after he went there. And this is a story that I heard from somebody who lives somewhere in the Altai. His great-grandmother was among the only people at the time in the family who enjoyed literacy and education. She used it to be a nurse and to perform illegal abortions for desperate people in private, I imagine since the late 1940s. She does so for many years. She uses the same room in her house. My brother, who knew the guy, said that the room was always uncanny, was constantly very cold and eerie. So, his friend's visiting her, and she asked him to go down to this room and get something from there. This made him very uncomfortable. As soon as he got down there, he sees a tall man with pure white skin, covered in chains and blood, standing in the middle of the room. He's taken aback. He blinks. The man disappears back into nothingness. And this one was in Tanka, about 2013, January 15th. It was just after midnight, and it was minus 55 degrees Celsius, and I really needed to go to the bathroom. So I go outside to do my business. I was out there for around 5 or 10 minutes, and suddenly I can hear a conversation that is near. I cannot discern the words though. The speaking is all slurred. I think maybe some local alcoholics are talking near the courtyard, but I'm freezing my ass off, literally, so it's time to go back into the house. I get out of the toilet, and there's nobody around. There's only a few of my own horses that are nearby in their stable. They're looking at me. Their ears are perked up. It's strange. How do these people disappear so quickly? After all, they just talked amongst themselves a few seconds ago. But I return home. Remember that now is Tanka time. I'm starting to remember one ritual, and goosebumps are beginning to crawl. According to Yakut's custom, on the night of January 13th to 14th, to the night of January 18th into 19th, there comes a time of fortune-telling. According to belief, in this time, the god of fate, Tonka Khan Toyan, and other spirits are the closest to the human world, and it is at that time that predictions are the most accurate and true. Some predictions can be quite dangerous if it is incorrect to conduct a ritual. It can lead to physical or mental injury, or even death. For example, if you want to know about your future, You can listen to what the horses say. People hid in a stable and waited for animals to speak in human language, predicting the fate of their owners and their acquaintances. It is noteworthy that if the horses notice the presence of people, they'll kill them. Now let's go back to January of 2010. It was a few days after New Year's. My parents went to a friend's in a neighboring village. The older brother remained in charge, but that night he was also out to a party. At the time, our elder brother's bride was also visiting us. I used to sleep on the second floor in my room, but in those days I slept on the first floor in the living room in front of the TV. The older brother's bride slept across the room. It was around 3 a.m. After decided that I had watched enough TV, I decided to fall asleep. But before I could, I began to hear noises from the second floor. Somebody was walking. This is impossible to enter the second floor from outside without breaking any windows. From the inside, there's only a staircase that leads to the second floor, which is located next to the hall. Meanwhile, the sounds of footsteps above have accelerated. The older brother's bride asked me in a frightened voice, "Can you hear that?" I replied that I heard it too. The footsteps stop. Then, the sound of a door handle began to be heard. Someone or something slowly opened the door on the second floor. Then, it calmed down for a couple of seconds, and then the door handle began to twist. After several more quiet moments and slow actions, someone started repeating it much louder and faster. The bride whispered that she was scared and that I should do something, but I also laid in fear, and I was afraid to move. Then the noises stopped, and the door handle stopped. Footsteps could be heard again. Then suddenly, someone started to loudly smash on the door. All this was repeated for a few seconds until it ultimately became quiet again. Nobody wanted to get up and go check what was happening upstairs. My older brother returned soon after. We told him what happened. He checked the second floor and found nothing. His version was that it was the spirit of the house. The spirit of the house began to do this because we did not contact him and did not introduce him to the bride. After that, we lit a fire in a hearth. We fed the spirit and explained the situation to him. There was no more noise in the house. One day, a horse breeder decided to return his horses to the stable and went to look for them. He found a place where they grazed. Everyone was there, except for one foal. The man began to look for his foal, but he did not find him nearby. Then he decided to go towards the nearby forest, and soon, next to the forest, he found the footprints of an animal leading into the woods. The horse breeder followed the trail further. He walked through the forest for a long time until he noticed the strangeness. It was absolutely silent in the forest. There was no sound of birds or animals. Then he began to feel strange, as if he was drunk, although he barely ever drank at all. The man decided that he was just tired and went further on the trail until he saw something that greatly frightened him. A gutted foal lay on the ground, being devoured by the creature. The creature was very strange. It was pure white, and it was about the size of a bear, but it had an incomprehensible shape. It was impossible to make out where the head and limbs were. It was also impossible to even imagine and approximate an outline, because the creature seemed to be enveloped in a fog, although there was no fog. The creature heard a noise from the man and stopped moving. He felt its gaze go upon him. They stood for several seconds until the creature suddenly began to become transparent and disappear. When it became fully dissolved, the forest ceased to be quiet, and the strange feeling disappeared from the man. Shortly after this incident, the man faced a series of troubles. First, his wife suddenly left him for another man. Then, for various reasons, his animals began to die off. Then his house burned down. The man became an alcoholic, and in a drunken state, he told his story. At the end, he added that he saw something that an ordinary person should not have seen. So, his life began to collapse. This was another story that I was told. An old man lived near the river. He was about 90 years old, but he was still in good physical shape. Once, he went to the river for water. Suddenly, his heart ached. He fell, and he died. Preparations for the funeral began. Suddenly, while preparing, the old man got up and came to life. Everyone was very scared, but then they calmed down and began to ask what happened. He began to tell. When he walked to the river, his heart began to ache. Then his head started spinning. He lost consciousness. After a while, he woke up in an unfamiliar place. He stood on a flat rocky surface. There was fog everywhere. Nothing was visible. Suddenly, a deep, powerful voice rang out from above. He said name, surname, and patronymic, and asked if that was his name. The old man replied that, sort of, the surname was correct, the name was correct, but the patronymic was slightly different. There was silence for a while. The same voice from above asked if the old man was a pilot. The old man was surprised and said no. He said he had worked his entire life as a builder and then as a driver, but now he's retired. A furious voice sounded from above, addressing someone else. It said, "What person did you send me? I asked for a pilot, not a retired man. Bring this man back." Then the old man woke up while preparations for his funeral were beginning. A few months later, a plane crash occurred in Yakutia. One of the victims was the pilot, whose name and surname coincided with his name. Only the patronymics were different. The old man lived for several more years and then died of natural causes. And if you're curious as to what a patronymic is, it's a middle name. There are several stories about how the NKVD hunted very powerful shamans. This story is one of them. The NKVD later became the KGB. In a remote area, there lived an old and very powerful hermit shaman. A special team arrived in this area to catch the shamans. They settled in an administration building in the village. The team leader gave the command to 3 of his members to go to the shaman's hut, arrest him, and bring him here. After some time, the squad returned and reported that they had tied the shaman and brought him on a sleigh. When people left the building and went to the sleigh, they found that there was only a tied chair on it. The boss got very angry and asked what the hell this was. All 3 people swore that they had caught the shaman and brought him here. The chief became even more angry and ordered to gather an even larger squad, return to the shaman's hut, and really arrest him. If they play a joke like that again, he will personally execute them. The squad went on the road. After some time, the squad returned and said that the shaman had been caught, now, definitely, and stands tied up outside. He strongly resisted, and they could hardly bring him here. When everyone went outside, they saw a bull tied with ropes. The chief got angry more than ever, took out his pistol, and began to aim at one of the members of the squad. But suddenly, from the side of the road, someone shouted. A lonely old man walked towards them. He said that he was the shaman that they were looking for. He asked not to shoot people because they honestly did their job, although they failed. The chief began to aim at the shaman's head with the pistol. He stood for about half a minute and suddenly ordered the release of the shaman. The old man left. One of his subordinates asked why he did not shoot the shaman. The boss replied that at the moment when he was aiming at the shaman, he had a very strange feeling that he was aiming at his own head, and it was not clear at whom he would shoot if he pulled the trigger. This is another story about the same shaman. I feel like I can remember his name, but I forgot. Once, a group of young people came to the shaman's hut. It was a team of geologists. The shaman accepted them and offered to wait while he and his wife prepared food and set the table. The geologists said that they did not believe in supernatural abilities, that this was all nonsense, and asked the shaman to show his abilities if he had them. The old man turned to his wife and ordered her to bring an axe. His wife brought him an axe. The shaman put his foot on the table and bared it. He then took the axe and began to chop it down. The geologists got scared and fled to the village. They told the residents about the case, but the locals explained to them that the shaman decided to play a trick on them, and that, in fact, there was nothing like this. The geologists did not believe the locals and decided to stay in the village. A couple of days later, one of the geologists noticed a shaman who came into the village for food. The old man looked fine. Both of his legs were completely intact. Another time, with the same shaman, he decided to go to the village to visit a distant relative. He accepted him, and they sat down at the table and began to dine. The man said that he heard about the old man's abilities and asked to show them. The shaman asked the man to wait, that he would soon see for himself. They sat like this for a while, and they found out that they had ran out of bread. The owner of the house asked his son to go to the neighbors and borrow some bread. The son left the house, went to the neighbors, and after a while, a knock is heard at the door. The man opens up the door and sees a surprised son. He says that he was sure he was knocking on the neighbors. Then the man asked his son again to go to the neighbors for bread. The child leaves once again, and soon there was another knock on the door. The man opens, and once again it's his son. His son looks scared, frightened, and says that this time he definitely walked to the neighbors. The man began to suspect something and asked his son to go to the neighbors for bread the third time. The child barely agreed and left. Then the man looked out the window to see where the child was going, and he saw his son sprinting laps around the house in a circle. After a few laps, he stopped at the front door and started knocking. When the doors opened, his son began to cry and says that he does not understand what's happening. He is obviously scared. The man asked the old man for forgiveness and asked him to stop doing this. The old man agreed and asked the child to visit the neighbors again. This time, everything would be fine. The child refused to leave the house. The owner of the house then went to the neighbors himself and soon returned with more bread. And this is the last one I have for you. It was 1945, the end of World War II. A wife is waiting for her husband to return from the war with her son and her old mother. Time passes. Many soldiers return to the village. but her husband does not. At the same time, she did not receive any letter about his death. She went to a local hermit shaman to find out where her husband is. The shaman performed the ritual. The shaman also does not know where the man is, since it's not visible in either the world of the living or in the world of the dead. More time passes. One day, the same shaman came into the woman's house with an anxious expression on her face. She said that her husband will come to visit her tonight, but the woman must cook him his favorite dishes and talk to him. Then he will leave. But she shouldn't touch him, otherwise there will be big trouble. A woman tried to ask the shaman what it all means. The shaman said that she was forbidden to talk about it anymore, and then left the house. As time passes, night falls. Someone is knocking on the door. The woman opens the door, and there's her husband. He looked dirty and pale. He wore a big raincoat. The woman remembered the words of the shaman, and she didn't touch him. She and her mother began to set the table. The man sat at the table and began to eat. The wife asked him questions, but he didn't answer. Because of the noise, his son woke up. He saw his father. He ran up to him and was about to help his father take off his raincoat and wanted to hang it. After removing a cloak, everyone saw that the man wore a torn military uniform. There were bullet holes, many wounds visible in his body. The man got up from the table and started to approach the woman and his son. An old grandmother stood in his way. She screamed for the woman and her son to run away. She will detain him. They ran outside. They go to a neighbor's and explain the situation. A company of locals are gathered soon. They went to examine the house, and all they found was the dead old woman. There was a trace of inexpressible horror that was imprinted on her face. The soldier was never seen again, nor was he found. So, I hope you enjoyed that compilation, and if you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and comment, and all that great stuff. And as always, there is an email in the description below, as well as a PayPal and a Patreon, if you would like to send in your story, or donate to the channel. And with that, I thank you for watching, I thank you for pulling up a stump, and remember to follow the 3 H's of the channel. I'll see you in the next one.